Hello everyone, I'm the DreamTeller and I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The headlights flickered and my heart sank. Not now. Not here. I was driving home from my sister's place, taking the long way to avoid traffic. The storm had been brewing all day, but now it unleashed its full fury. Rain pelted my windshield like tiny bullets, and the wipers struggled to keep up. The road ahead was a blur of darkness and water. That's when my car decided to give up. It started with a strange grinding noise. I eased off the gas, hoping it would stop, but then the engine cut out completely. I coasted to the side of the road, my stomach twisting into knots. I sat there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. The rain drummed on the roof, creating a cacophony that matched my racing thoughts. I was stuck in the middle of nowhere in a storm, with a dead car. I tried the key again, praying for a miracle. Nothing, not even a click. My phone was the next logical step. I fumbled for it in my purse, my hands shaking slightly. No signal, of course. "Come on," I muttered, holding the phone up to the window. Still nothing, just a mocking, "no service" and message staring back at me. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Someone would come along eventually, right? It was just a matter of waiting it out. I locked the doors and settled in, watching the rain hammer down on the windshield. Minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. The rain didn't let up. The road stayed empty. I could feel panic starting to creep in, but I kept telling myself it would be fine. I turned off the headlights to save the battery and sat in the dark. The sound of the rain was deafening, pounding against the roof of the car. There were moments where I swore I heard something else, something moving out there in the dark. I tried not to think about it. It was around the 3rd hour when I finally saw headlights coming from behind me. I felt a huge wave of relief wash over me. I sat up straighter, hoping whoever it was would stop. As the lights got closer, I could see it was a big truck, one of those old beat-up ones with an engine that rumbled loud even over the rain. The truck slowed down as it passed my car, then stopped a few feet ahead. My heart was racing again, but this time from a mix of relief and nerves. I wasn't sure what kind of person would stop for a stranded woman in the middle of nowhere in the rain. But at that point, I didn't have much of a choice. I saw the driver's door open, and a man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face and a dark jacket. He stood there for a moment, looking at my car through the rain, before walking over. I cracked my window just a bit, enough to talk, but not too wide. I didn't want to let the rain in, but also, something about him made me hesitate. "Car trouble?" he asked, leaning down a little to peer inside. "Yeah, it just died on me a few hours ago," I replied, trying to sound calm. "I've been waiting for someone to pass by." He looked around, scanning the empty road, then back at me. "No service out here, huh?" I shook my head. "None." He was quiet for a moment, then smiled a little too wide, showing a bit too many teeth. "Lucky I came by then," he said, his voice too casual. "Not a lot of people take this road at night, especially in weather like this." I nodded, hoping he would just offer to call someone for me, but instead, he stepped closer to the window, glancing inside the car. "You alone out here?" I felt a chill run down my spine. Something about the way he asked made me uncomfortable. "Yeah, but my husband knows I'm stuck," I lied. "He's on his way." The man didn't seem convinced. He smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. "In this weather, going to take him a while to get here." I didn't know what to say. I just wanted him to leave, or at least call for help and go, but he wasn't moving. He kept staring at me, his eyes lingering a little too long, making me feel like I was trapped in my own car. "Mind if I take a look under the hood?" he asked suddenly, stepping back and motioning toward the front of the car. I hesitated, but I didn't want to seem rude or scared. Sure, I said, popping the hood. He walked around to the front of the car, and I watched as he fiddled with something under the hood. But after a few minutes, he came back to the window, shaking his head. "Looks like your battery's dead," he said, but there was something off about his tone. "I can give you a jump, but you'll probably need a tow." I nodded, trying to stay calm. "That would be great. Thanks." He walked back to his truck, and I watched him through the rearview mirror. My heart was racing again, and my hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. Something about this didn't feel right. I didn't trust him. He took his time getting the cables, moving slower than he needed to. When he finally came back and hooked them up, he leaned into my window again, closer this time. "You know, it's dangerous for a woman to be out here alone," he said, his voice low. "You never know who might come by." His words sent a wave of fear through me, but I forced a smile. "Yeah, well, I'm lucky you stopped." He smiled again, that same unsettling grin. "Yeah, lucky." He got back into his truck and revved the engine to charge my battery. After a few minutes, my car sputtered to life. Relief washed over me, but it didn't last long. As I thanked him, he leaned in one last time. "Maybe you should let me follow you, just in case something happens again." I shook my head quickly. "No, that's okay. My husband's almost here. Thanks for the help." His smile faded for a second, but then it returned, colder this time. "All right. Suit yourself." I didn't wait for him to say anything else. I pulled away as fast as I could, not caring if I was driving too fast for the rain. My heart was pounding in my chest the entire time, and I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see his truck following me. But thankfully, it wasn't there. I didn't slow down until I was back on a well-lit, populated road. Even then, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. As I drove, my mind raced with what-ifs. What if I hadn't lied about my husband? What if I had let him follow me? What were his true intentions? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how vulnerable I had been. I made it home safely that night, but the experience stayed with me. Every time I drive alone now, especially at night or in bad weather, I think about that man. I think about how quickly a simple car breakdown can turn into something potentially dangerous. I've since learned to always be prepared. I keep an emergency kit in my car, complete with jumper cables, a flashlight, and a portable battery pack for my phone. I make sure someone always knows where I am when I'm traveling alone, and I trust my instincts. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. That night taught me that the real monsters aren't always supernatural beings or movie villains. Sometimes, they're just ordinary people who take advantage of others in vulnerable situations. It's a lesson I'll never forget, and one I hope others can learn from without having to experience it firsthand. As I settled into bed that night, the storm still raging outside, I couldn't help but feel grateful. Grateful that I had made it home safely, grateful for the instincts that had kept me cautious, and grateful for the wake-up call that had made me more aware of my surroundings. But even as I drifted off to sleep, a part of me couldn't shake the image of that man's smile, too wide and too cold, or the sound of his voice as he suggested following me home. In my dreams, I saw headlights in my rearview mirror, always there, no matter how fast I drove or how many turns I took. The experience changed me in ways I'm still discovering. I'm more cautious now, more aware of the potential dangers that lurk in everyday situations. But I'm also stronger, more prepared, and more determined to never let myself be a victim. As the days passed, I found myself checking the local news, half expecting to see a story about a woman who wasn't as lucky as I had been. But there was nothing. Just the usual reports of minor accidents and weather-related incidents. Sometimes, I wonder if I overreacted, if the man was just trying to help, and my fear had twisted his actions into something sinister. But then I remember the look in his eyes, the way he lingered too long, asked too many questions. and I know that trusting my instincts was the right thing to do. I've shared my story with friends and family, urging them to be careful, to be prepared. Some listen with wide eyes, promising to be more cautious. Others brush it off, assuring me that nothing like that would ever happen to them. I hope they're right, but I know better now. I know that danger can find you when you least expect it, on a lonely road in the middle of a storm. The experience has become a part of me now, a constant reminder to stay alert, to trust my gut, and to never take my safety for granted. It's a heavy lesson, but one I'm grateful to have learned without paying a higher price. And so, life goes on. I still drive that road sometimes, when I visit my sister. But now, I make sure my car is in perfect condition before I leave. I check the weather forecast obsessively, and I always keep my phone charged and within reach, because you never know when a simple drive home might turn into something much more dangerous. And when it does, being prepared might just save your life. The first raindrop hit my face like an icy finger, and I knew I was in trouble. I'd been so caught up in the thrill of exploring new trails that I'd completely lost track of time and my bearings. I've always loved hiking, the solitude of nature, the challenge of pushing my limits. But as the sky darkened and the wind picked up, I realized I'd made a rookie mistake. I was lost. The trail markers I'd been following now obscured by the growing gloom and the increasingly dense foliage. The rain started in earnest, fat droplets quickly soaking through my light jacket. I hadn't packed for this. Another mistake. My phone, usually a reliable lifeline, showed no signal. Of course, I was truly on my own. I pushed on, hoping to find a familiar landmark or at least some higher ground where I might get my bearings. But the forest seemed to close in around me, the trees looming larger and more ominous with each passing minute. The sound of the rain drumming against the leaves created a disorienting white noise that made it hard to think clearly. As darkness fell, panic began to set in. I was soaked to the bone, shivering, and completely turned around. That's when I saw it, a faint glimmer of light through the trees. Hope surged through me. Maybe it was a ranger station, or at least another hiker with a campfire. I stumbled towards the light, branches whipping at my face, mud sucking at my boots. As I got closer, I could make out the shape of a small cabin. It wasn't much, just a simple wooden structure, but in that moment, it looked like salvation. I approached the door, my heart pounding. This deep in the woods, who knew what or who I might find, but I was out of options. I raised my hand and knocked, the sound barely audible over the howling wind and pounding rain. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, just as I was about to knock again, I heard movement inside. Slow, shuffling steps approached the door. I held my breath as it creaked open. The man who stood before me was not what I expected. He was old, impossibly old, with a face so lined and weathered it looked like a topographical map. His eyes, pale and rheumy, seemed to look right through me. Hello," I stammered, water dripping from my chin. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I've gotten lost in the storm. Could I possibly come in and warm up for a bit?" The old man didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, staring at me with those unsettling eyes. Then, slowly, he stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in," he said, his voice a dry rasp that sent a shiver down my spine. "You shouldn't be out in this weather." I hesitated for a moment, my instincts screaming at me that something wasn't right. But the howling wind at my back made the decision for me. I stepped inside. The cabin was dimly lit by a single oil lamp, casting long shadows across the sparse furnishings. A small fire crackled in a stone fireplace, and I gravitated towards it, grateful for the warmth. "Thank you so much," I said, turning to face my host. "I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't found your cabin." The old man had shuffled to a rickety chair by the fire. He lowered himself into it with a groan, his joints creaking almost as loudly as the chair. Not many people come this way, he said, his eyes never leaving me, especially not on a night like this. I tried to smile, but something about his gaze made it difficult. I got turned around on one of the trails. I thought I knew where I was going, but I trailed off, suddenly aware of how foolish I sounded. The old man nodded slowly. The forest can be treacherous. It doesn't like outsiders. I laughed nervously, unsure how to respond to such a strange statement. Well, I'm certainly grateful for your hospitality. Once the storm passes, I'll be on my way. The storm won't pass, he said, with a certainty that chilled me more than the rain had. Not for a long while. I looked towards the single window, streaked with rain. The wind howled outside, as if to confirm his words. Do you have a phone I could use? I asked, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. My family will be worried sick. The old man shook his head. No phone, no electricity, just me and the forest. My heart sank. I was truly cut off from the world, alone with this strange old man in his isolated cabin. I tried to reassure myself. He had taken me in, after all. Surely he meant me no harm. As if reading my thoughts, he spoke again. You're safe here, for now. The way he said "for now" made my skin crawl. I forced another smile. I appreciate that. I'm sure I'll be able to find my way once it's light out. He didn't respond, just continued to stare at me with those pale, unblinking eyes. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the relentless pounding of the rain. I cleared my throat, desperate to break the tension. So, do you live out here all alone? A small smile curved his thin lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. Not alone. Never alone. I glanced around the small cabin, half expecting to see someone else emerge from the shadows, but we were still the only two people in the room. Oh, do you have family nearby? I asked, trying to keep my voice light. He shook his head slowly. No family, but the forest. The forest is always here, always watching, always hungry. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with my wet clothes. The way he spoke about the forest, as if it were a living, sentient thing, was deeply unsettling. I'm sure it must get lonely out here, I said, edging slightly away from him. His smile widened, showing teeth that were far too sharp and yellow. Lonely? No. The forest provides company, and occasionally, it provides visitors. The implication in his words was clear, and fear gripped me. I stood up abruptly, no longer caring about politeness. I think maybe I should try to find my way back. The rain seems to be letting up a bit. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. If anything, the storm seemed to have intensified, the wind howling like a living thing outside the cabin walls. The old man didn't move from his chair, but his eyes followed me as I edged towards the door. You can't leave, he said, his voice somehow carrying over the noise of the storm. The forest won't let you. I reached for the door handle, my hand shaking. Thank you for your hospitality, but I really must be going. As my fingers touched the cold metal of the handle, a deafening crack of thunder shook the cabin. I jumped back, my heart pounding. The old man chuckled, a dry, wheezing sound that raised the hair on the back of my neck. I told you, the forest wants you to stay. I turned to face him, fear and anger warring inside me. What do you mean? What's going on here? He leaned forward in his chair, his eyes gleaming in the firelight. The forest is old, older than you can imagine. And it's hungry, always hungry. It needs to feed. I backed away, my back pressed against the door. You're insane. I'm leaving, storm or no storm. I turned and yanked the door open, ready to face whatever was out there rather than spend another moment in this cabin with this madman. But what I saw outside stopped me cold. The forest had changed. The trees seemed to have moved closer, their branches intertwining to form an impenetrable barrier. And in the gaps between the trunks, I saw eyes, hundreds of glowing eyes, watching me. I slammed the door shut, my breath coming in short gasps. What is this? The old man's laughter filled the cabin, a sound of pure, malevolent joy. I told you, the forest is hungry, and you, my dear, are the feast. I sank to the floor, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a nightmare, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and fear. But the cold floor beneath me, the heat of the fire on my face, the old man's laughter ringing in my ears, it all felt terrifyingly real. As the night wore on, the storm outside seemed to merge with the horror inside the cabin. The wind's howl became the voice of the forest, calling for me. The rain beating against the roof sounded like hundreds of hungry creatures clawing to get in. And through it all, the old man sat in his chair, watching me with those pale, hungry eyes, waiting, always waiting. I don't know how long I've been here now. Days, weeks. Time seems to have lost all meaning. The storm never stops. The forest never retreats. And the old man, he never sleeps. Sometimes, in my more lucid moments, I wonder if I'm still out there in the forest, lost and alone, hallucinating all of this as hypothermia sets in. But then I hear the old man's wheezing laugh, feel the heat of the never-ending fire, and I know this is all too real. I write this now as a warning. To you, whoever you are, reading these words, be careful when you venture into the wilderness. Respect the forest, because sometimes, when you're lost in the woods, the most dangerous thing isn't being alone. It's finding that you're not alone at all. And remember, if you ever find yourself caught in a storm, seeking shelter in a lonely cabin deep in the woods, sometimes it's better to face the storm than what waits for you inside. The forest is always hungry, and now, I fear, so am I. The first scream pierced through the patter of rain on our tent, jolting me awake. For a moment, I thought I'd dreamed it. Then I heard it again, a raw, terrified shriek that made my blood run cold. My wife, Sarah, stirred beside me. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. We'd been camping in these woods countless times, but never had we encountered anything like this. The excitement of our annual camping trip had worn off hours ago, replaced by the discomfort of lying on hard ground while rain pelted our tent. Now, as another scream echoed through the night, that discomfort morphed into pure, unadulterated fear. "Maybe it's just an animal," Sarah suggested, but the quiver in her voice betrayed her doubt. I wish I could have agreed with her, but those screams were undeniably human. I fumbled for the flashlight, my hands shaking as I flicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness of our tent, illuminating Sarah's pale face. "We should check it out," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Someone might need help." Sarah nodded reluctantly. We both knew it was the right thing to do, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. As we unzipped the tent, the sounds of the forest hit us full force. The rain had eased to a gentle drizzle, but the wind whipped through the trees, creating an eerie whistle. Beneath it all, I could hear something else. Hushed voices, too low to make out words, but unmistakably there. I stepped out first, scanning the area with my flashlight. Our campsite was a small clearing surrounded by dense woods. In the daylight, it had seemed peaceful and secluded. Now, it felt exposed and vulnerable. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding weak and uncertain. "Is anyone there? Do you need help?" Silence. Even the whispering voices had stopped. The forest seemed to be holding its breath. Sarah clutched my arm. "Maybe we should go back inside," she whispered. I was about to agree when I saw it, a flicker of movement at the edge of the clearing. I swung the flashlight towards it. but whatever it was had vanished into the shadows. "Did you see that?" I asked Sarah. She nodded, her grip on my arm tightening. "What was it?" Before I could answer, we heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps crunching on the leaf-strewn ground. They were coming from all around us, closing in on our campsite. Panic surged through me. I grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her back towards the tent. "We need to get out of here," I hissed. But as we turned, the beam of my flashlight fell on a figure standing directly in our path. It was a man, or at least it had the shape of a man. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in tattered clothes that hung from his frame like rags on a scarecrow. But it was his face that made my heart stop, or rather, the lack of it. Where his features should have been, there was only a blank, featureless expanse of skin. Sarah's scream tore through the night, matching the ones that had woken us earlier. I stumbled backward, dragging her with me, only to bump into something solid. Spinning around, I found ourselves face to face with another of these creatures. They were everywhere, emerging from the woods like ghosts materializing from the mist. Each one was different. Some short, some tall, some thin, some bulky, but they all shared that same terrifying, featureless face. "Run," I yelled, pulling Sarah towards the gap between two of the figures. We sprinted into the woods, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. Behind us, I could hear the creatures giving chase, their footsteps surprisingly fast and coordinated for beings that seemed so unnatural. We ran blindly through the forest, with no idea where we were going or what direction would lead us to safety. The beam of the flashlight, still clutched tightly in my hand, bounced wildly, creating a strobe-like effect that made the woods seem even more disorienting. "There!" Sarah gasped, pointing ahead. Through the trees, I could see lights, a road, or maybe a house. Either way, it was our best chance. We pushed ourselves harder, ignoring the burning in our lungs and the ache in our legs. The lights grew closer, and I allowed myself a glimmer of hope. Maybe we would make it out of this nightmare after all. But just as we were about to break through the tree line, something grabbed my ankle. I went down hard, the flashlight flying from my hand and disappearing into the underbrush. Sarah stumbled to a stop, turning back for me. "Go!" I yelled, struggling against whatever had hold of me. "Get help!" For a moment, she hesitated. Then, with a sob, she turned and ran towards the lights. I watched her go, praying she'd make it to safety. Cold, strong hands gripped my arms, pulling me to my feet. I found myself surrounded by the faceless creatures, their blank visages somehow conveying a sense of curiosity and hunger. One of them stepped forward, its head tilting to the side as if studying me. Then, slowly, it raised a hand to its featureless face. To my horror, the skin began to ripple and shift, molding itself into features. My features. Within seconds, I was staring at a perfect copy of my own face. The others followed suit, their blank faces transforming into a sea of my own terrified expression. It was like looking into a nightmarish hall of mirrors. I wanted to scream, to fight, to run, but my body wouldn't respond. I could only stand there, paralyzed with fear, as the creatures closed in around me. The last thing I remember is a chorus of voices, my voice, repeated over and over, saying, "Welcome home." I woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later. They told me I'd been found wandering along the highway, miles from our campsite, babbling incoherently about faceless monsters. Sarah was there, tears in her eyes as she clutched my hand. She told me how she'd made it to a nearby farmhouse and called for help, how search parties had combed the woods for days before finding me. The official story is that we were attacked by a bear, that the trauma of the event coupled with exposure and dehydration had caused me to hallucinate. They say there's no evidence of any other people in those woods, let alone creatures like the ones I described. But I know what I saw. I know what happened to me in those woods. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I can't shake the feeling that the face staring back at me isn't quite my own. We don't go camping anymore. The woods hold too many terrors, too many unanswered questions. But even in the safety of our home, I can't escape the memory of that night. Every time I close my eyes, I see those blank faces. Every time I hear a noise in the dark, I'm back in those woods, surrounded by creatures wearing my face. And sometimes in the dead of night, I hear whispers, voices that sound like mine, but aren't. They call to me, urging me to return to the forest, to come home. I try to ignore them. I try to convince myself it was all just a nightmare, a product of fear and imagination. But deep down, I know the truth. Something happened to me in those woods, something that changed me in ways I'm still struggling to understand. Sarah notices it too, though she tries to hide it. I catch her watching me sometimes, a look of uncertainty in her eyes. She says I'm different since that night, that sometimes I don't seem like myself. If only she knew how right she is. I've tried to move on, to forget about that night and the horrors we encountered. But it's not that easy. The memories linger, as vivid and terrifying as the moment they happened. And with each passing day, I find myself wondering, did I ever really leave those woods? Or did a part of me stay behind, replaced by something else? I don't have answers, only questions that keep me awake at night. All I know is that the world is a much stranger and more terrifying place than I ever imagined. And somewhere out there, in the depths of the forest, there are creatures wearing my face, waiting for me to return. So if you ever find yourself camping in the woods and hear screams in the night, don't investigate. Don't try to help. Just run. Run as fast and as far as you can. Because some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some horrors are too great to face. As for me, I'll keep fighting the whispers, keep trying to hold on to who I am. But a part of me knows it's only a matter of time before the forest calls me back. And when it does, I'm not sure I'll be strong enough to resist. After all, how do you run from something that wears your own face? The child's silhouette was barely visible through the curtain of rain, a small, lonely figure on the side of the deserted road. I blinked, sure my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. But when I looked again, the child was still there, a stark contrast against the storm-ravaged landscape. I'd been driving for hours, pushing through the relentless downpour to get home after a grueling business trip. The monotony of the windshield wipers and the hiss of tires on wet asphalt had lulled me into a trance-like state. But the sight of that child jolted me back to full alertness. My foot eased off the accelerator as I approached. What was a kid doing out here, miles from anywhere, in this weather? As I drew closer, I could make out more details. It was a little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with long, dark hair plastered to her face by the rain. She wore a yellow raincoat that seemed too thin for the biting cold. I pulled over, my hazard lights blinking in the gloom. The rational part of my brain screamed that this was a bad idea. I was alone on a deserted road, stopping for a stranger. But this was a child. I couldn't just drive by. I rolled down my window, wincing as cold rain spattered my face. "Hey there," I called out, trying to sound friendly and non-threatening. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" The girl turned to face me, and I felt an inexplicable chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Her face was pale, almost translucent in the gray light, and her eyes. There was something off about them, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. "I'm lost," she said, her voice barely audible over the pounding rain. "Can you help me?" I hesitated. Every instinct told me to drive away, to leave this strange situation behind. But I couldn't abandon a child in need. I took a deep breath and made a decision I would come to question for years to come. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "Hop in, and we'll figure out where you need to go." I leaned across to open the passenger door, and the girl climbed in. the car filled with the scent of wet clothes and something else, something earthy and unpleasant that I couldn't identify. "What's your name?" I asked as I pulled back onto the road, windshield wipers working overtime. "Emily," she replied, her voice soft and oddly flat. "Nice to meet you, Emily. I'm Jack. Can you tell me where you live? Or maybe your parents' phone number?" Emily didn't respond. She just stared straight ahead, water dripping from her hair onto my car seat. "Emily?" I prompted, glancing at her. "Do you know where your home is?" She turned to look at me then, and I nearly swerved off the road. Her eyes were completely black, no whites visible at all. I blinked hard, sure I must be seeing things. When I looked again, her eyes were normal, a deep brown, but definitely normal. "I need to go home," she said, her voice suddenly urgent. "They're waiting for me." "Who's waiting for you, Emily?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "My family," she replied. "They're always waiting." Something about the way she said it made my skin crawl. I focused on the road ahead, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Okay, but where is home? Can you give me an address?" Emily pointed ahead. "That way. Keep going." I drove on, the rain seeming to intensify with every mile. The roads were becoming treacherous, deep puddles forming in potholes and at the sides of the asphalt. I slowed down, straining to see through the deluge. "Are you sure this is the right way?" I asked after we'd been driving for about 20 minutes. We were deep in the countryside now, farms and fields giving way to dense woodland. Emily nodded, her face eerily calm. "We're almost there. Turn right at the next road." I followed her directions, turning onto a narrow, unpaved track that led into the woods. The trees loomed over us, their branches forming a dark canopy that blocked out what little light remained. My headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating a path that seemed to wind endlessly into the forest. "Emily," I said, my voice shaking slightly, "I don't think this is right. Maybe we should turn back, find a police station." "No!" she cried, her sudden vehemence making me jump. "We have to keep going. They're waiting." I glanced at her, startled by her outburst. For a moment, just a moment, I could have sworn her eyes were completely black again. But when I looked closer, they were normal. I shook my head, blaming my imagination and the poor light. We drove on in silence, the only sounds the rumble of the engine and the constant drumming of rain on the roof. The trees pressed in closer, their branches scraping against the sides of the car. I had to slow to a crawl to navigate the increasingly narrow and twisting path. Just as I was about to insist we turn back, the woods opened up into a small clearing. In the center stood a house, if you could call it that. It was more like a shack, its wooden walls gray with age, windows dark and empty. No lights shone from within, no sign of life at all. "We're here," Emily said, her voice filled with an emotion I couldn't identify. Was it joy? Fear? I couldn't tell. I stopped the car, staring at the dilapidated structure before us. "Emily, are you sure this is where you live? It doesn't look like anyone's home." She didn't answer. When I turned to look at her, my blood ran cold. She was gone. The passenger seat was empty, with no sign that anyone had ever been there. No wet stains on the seat, no muddy footprints on the floor mat. Nothing. I sat there, frozen, my mind struggling to process what was happening. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I losing my mind? A movement in my peripheral vision caught my attention. I turned to look out the windshield, and my heart nearly stopped. There, standing in front of the house, was Emily. But she wasn't alone. Surrounding her were shadowy figures, tall and unnaturally thin. I couldn't make out their features in the gloom, but I could feel their eyes on me. Emily raised her hand and waved, a smile spreading across her face. But it wasn't a child's smile of innocence and joy. It was something else entirely, something that made my blood run cold. I threw the car into reverse, my foot slamming down on the accelerator. The tires spun in the mud for a heart-stopping moment before finding purchase. I shot backward down the narrow path, branches whipping against the windows. I don't remember much of the drive back. It's all a blur of rain and darkness and bone-deep terror. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town, pulling into a brightly lit gas station like a ship finding safe harbor in a storm. I sat there for a long time, shaking, trying to make sense of what had happened. When I finally worked up the courage to check the passenger seat in the light, there was no sign that Emily had ever been there. No mud, no water, nothing. I reported the incident to the local police, but they found nothing. No evidence of the house in the woods. No missing children matching Emily's description. They put it down to an overactive imagination fueled by fatigue and the stressful driving conditions. But I know what I saw. I know what I experienced. And I'll never forget the chill that ran down my spine when I saw those figures surrounding Emily, or the smile on her face as she waved goodbye. I don't drive that road anymore. I avoid long trips in the rain, and whenever I see a child alone by the side of the road, I can't help but remember Emily and the terror of that night. Sometimes, helping a stranger isn't the right thing to do. Sometimes it's the beginning of a nightmare. So if you're ever driving on a lonely road in the rain, and you see a child standing alone, think twice before you stop, because you never know who or what might be waiting in the shadows, ready to welcome you home. The elevator shuddered to a stop between floors, plunging me into darkness. For a moment I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. Then, as if on cue, the emergency lights flickered to life, casting an eerie red glow throughout the small space. I'd been working late again, burning the midnight oil to meet a deadline. The office had been empty for hours, just me and the gentle hum of my computer. When I finally decided to call it quits, the storm outside had reached its peak. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by booming thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Now, trapped in this metal box, I could still hear the storm raging outside. The wind howled through the elevator shaft, creating an unsettling whistle that set my teeth on edge. I fumbled for my phone, hoping to call for help, but the screen remained stubbornly dark. No signal. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and frightened in the confined space. "Can anyone hear me?" Silence was my only answer. I pressed the emergency button, but nothing happened. No alarm, no voice from a speaker assuring me that help was on the way. Just more silence. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. "It's okay," I told myself. "Someone will notice the elevator isn't working. They'll come looking for you." But even as I thought it, I knew it wasn't true. It was the middle of the night, and I was the only one in the building. No one was coming. That's when I heard it. A soft, scraping sound, like nails dragging across metal. At first, I thought it was just the wind, or maybe the elevator cable settling. But then I heard it again, louder this time, and unmistakably coming from above me. I looked up, my eyes straining in the dim red light. The ceiling of the elevator seemed to ripple, as if something was moving on the other side. My breath caught in my throat as I watched a small bulge form in the metal, pushing downward. Then, to my horror, the bulge split open. A hand emerged, pale and skeletal, its fingers unnaturally long and tipped with sharp black nails. It groped blindly in the air for a moment before finding purchase on the edge of the opening it had created. I pressed myself against the far wall of the elevator, a scream building in my throat but unable to escape. As I watched, frozen in terror, the hand was joined by another. Together, they widened the hole, tearing through the metal as if it were paper. A face appeared in the opening, and I felt my sanity begin to slip. It was humanoid, but only barely. The skin was a sickly gray, pulled tight over sharp cheekbones. The eyes were huge, black, and utterly devoid of any humanity. And the mouth, The mouth was filled with row upon row of needle-like teeth. The creature began to lower itself into the elevator, its body contorting in ways that defied the laws of physics. I could hear the bones cracking and popping as it twisted and squeezed through the opening. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I lunged for the elevator doors, my fingers scrabbling at the seam where they met. I pulled with all my might, ignoring the pain as my nails bent and broke. To my surprise and relief, the doors began to part. I could see the hallway outside, dimly lit by more emergency lights. Freedom was just inches away. But as I started to squeeze through the gap, I felt something cold and clammy wrap around my ankle. I looked back and immediately wished I hadn't. The creature had fully entered the elevator and was reaching for me with those impossibly long arms. Its face was split in a grotesque grin, saliva dripping from its needle teeth. With a strength born of pure terror, I kicked out, my foot connecting with the creature's face. It let out a high-pitched shriek that made my ears ring, but its grip loosened just enough for me to pull free. I tumbled out into the hallway, scrambling to my feet and running without a backwards glance. I could hear it behind me, its claws scraping against the floor as it gave chase. The sound spurred me on, pushing me to run faster than I ever had before. I reached the stairwell and practically flew down the steps, taking them 3 at a time. The creature's shrieks echoed in the stairwell, sometimes sounding like it was right behind me, other times like it was coming from above or below. By the time I reached the ground floor, my lungs were burning and my legs felt like jelly. But I didn't stop. I burst out of the stairwell and sprinted across the lobby, my eyes fixed on the main doors and the rainy night beyond. Just as I reached the doors, the power came back on. The lobby was suddenly flooded with bright light, momentarily blinding me. I blinked rapidly, trying to clear my vision, and that's when I saw it. My reflection in the glass doors. But it wasn't just me. Standing right behind me, its face hovering over my shoulder, was the creature. Its black eyes met mine in the reflection, and its mouth stretched into that terrible, toothy grin. I spun around, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. But there was nothing there. The lobby was empty, save for me. I stood there for what felt like hours, my back pressed against the doors, eyes darting around the lobby. But nothing moved. Nothing appeared. Eventually, the adrenaline began to wear off, leaving me shaky and exhausted. Had I imagined it all? Was it just a hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep? It seemed impossible that such a creature could exist, let alone vanish into thin air. Slowly, cautiously, I made my way back to the elevator. It was working perfectly now. No sign of the hole the creature had torn in the ceiling. The ride up to my floor was uneventful, the elevator moving smoothly and stopping exactly where it should. When I reached my office, everything was as I had left it. My computer was still on, the screen glowing softly in the dark room. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a gentle rain that pattered against the windows. I gathered my things quickly, not wanting to spend another moment in the building. As I was about to leave, something caught my eye. There, on the sleeve of my jacket, was a single, long black hair. I plucked it off, holding it up to the light. It was unlike any hair I'd ever seen, coarse and wiry, more like a bristle than human hair. A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the creature's skeletal hands, its impossibly long fingers. I dropped the hair as if it had burned me and practically ran out of the office. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face, those black eyes, that mouth full of teeth. I kept expecting to hear that scraping sound, to see those long fingers reaching for me from the shadows. In the light of day, it all seemed absurd. A monster in the elevator. It was more likely that I'd dozed off while working and had an incredibly vivid nightmare. The hair could have come from anywhere. Maybe it wasn't even hair at all. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I couldn't forget the terror I'd felt, the certainty that what I'd seen was real. I still work in that building. I still use that elevator, but never alone, and never at night. And sometimes, when the lights flicker or the elevator shutters, I find myself looking up at the ceiling, half expecting to see those pale hands tearing through the metal. Because deep down, I know the truth. Something was in that elevator with me that night, something that shouldn't exist. And worst of all, I don't think it's finished with me yet. So, if you ever find yourself working late, alone in an empty building, and the elevator stops between floors, don't look up, don't listen for that scraping sound, and whatever you do, don't wait to see what might be trying to get in. Run. Run as fast and as far as you can. Because some things once seen can never be unseen. And some nightmares don't end when you wake up, they're just beginning. The truck's headlights cut through the rain like dull knives, barely illuminating the muddy road ahead. We'd been driving for hours, my wife Sarah and I, our 2 kids asleep in the back seat. What was supposed to be a fun family camping trip had turned into a nightmare of wrong turns and washed-out roads. "I think we're lost," Sarah said, her voice tight with worry. She was right, of course. The GPS had lost signal an hour ago, and the map on my phone was useless without service. We were well and truly in the middle of nowhere. I was about to suggest we turn around when I felt the truck lurch. The steering wheel jerked in my hands as we slid sideways, tires spinning uselessly in the mud. We came to a stop at an angle, half on and half off the road. "Damn it," I muttered, trying to keep my voice low so as not to wake the kids. I shifted into reverse, then drive, but the wheels just spun, digging us deeper into the muck. Sarah turned to me, her face pale in the dim light. "What are we going to do, Mark?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm for her sake. "It's okay. I'll get out and see how bad it is. Maybe I can find some branches or something to give us traction." I opened the door, wincing as the cold rain immediately soaked through my jacket. The storm had been raging for hours, turning the world into a dark, sodden mess. I circled the truck, my boots sinking ankle-deep into the mud with each step. It was worse than I thought. We were stuck good. As I stood there, trying to figure out our next move, I saw a flicker of light through the trees. Hope surged through me. Maybe it was a house or a gas station, somewhere we could at least ask for help. I hurried back to the truck, rapping on Sarah's window. She rolled it down, looking at me expectantly. "I think I saw lights through the trees," I said, pointing. "I'm going to check it out. Maybe someone can help us." Sarah's brow furrowed with concern. "I don't know, Mark. Maybe we should wait for morning. It's dangerous out there." I shook my head. "We can't stay here all night. The kids will be cold and hungry when they wake up. I'll be quick, I promise." After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. "Okay, but be careful." I gave her what I hoped was a reassuring smile and set off into the woods. The undergrowth was thick, branches whipping at my face as I pushed through. The rain seemed to intensify, if that was even possible, soaking me to the bone within minutes. Just when I was starting to think I'd imagined the light, I broke through into a clearing. There, in the center, stood a small, ramshackle house. A single light burned in one of the windows, a beacon in the stormy night. Relief washed over me as I approached the front door. It was weathered and warped, barely hanging on its hinges. I raised my hand to knock, then hesitated. Something felt off. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, a chill that had nothing to do with the rain running down my spine. But what choice did I have? We needed help. I took a deep breath and knocked. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then I heard movement inside, slow, shuffling footsteps approaching the door. It creaked open, revealing a man who looked as old and worn as the house itself. His skin was pale and papery, stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. But it was his eyes that caught my attention. They were an unnaturally bright blue, almost glowing in the dim light. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a dry rasp. I swallowed hard, fighting back the urge to turn and run. "I'm sorry to bother you so late, but my family and I are stuck. Our truck slid off the road about a quarter-mile back. I was hoping you might have a phone we could use, or maybe a tow rope." The old man stared at me for what felt like an eternity, those eerie blue eyes seeming to look right through me. Finally, he stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in," he said. "We'll see what we can do." I hesitated for a moment, every instinct screaming at me to leave, but the thought of Sarah and the kids, cold and scared in the truck, made me step over the threshold. The inside of the house was as dilapidated as the outside. The wallpaper was peeling. The furniture looked like it hadn't been used in decades. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "Wait here," the old man said, shuffling off into another room. I stood there, dripping onto the worn floorboards, my eyes darting around the room. That's when I noticed the photographs. They covered one entire wall, hundreds of them. As I looked closer, my blood ran cold. They were all of people, men, women, children, but something was wrong with each picture. The subjects all had the same terrified expression, their eyes wide with fear, and in the background of each photo, barely visible, was the old man. I was so engrossed in the disturbing images that I didn't hear him return. His voice made me jump. "Your family," he said. "Where are they?" I turned to find him standing much closer than I expected, those blue eyes boring into me. In his hand was not a phone or a tow rope, but a large, rusty knife. Terror gripped me, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. The old man's face split into a grin, revealing teeth that were far too sharp to be human. "Don't worry," he said, his voice no longer a rasp, but a deep, rumbling growl. "We'll bring them here. One big, happy family." I didn't think. I just moved. I shoved past him, bolting for the door. I could hear him behind me, that inhuman growl turning into a roar of rage. I burst out into the rain, running as fast as I could through the woods. Branches whipped at my face. Roots threatened to trip me, but I didn't slow down. I could hear him crashing through the undergrowth behind me, far too fast for an old man. Whatever he was, it wasn't human. I broke through the tree line, the truck coming into view. Sarah must have heard me coming because she had already started the engine. I threw myself into the passenger seat, gasping, "Go, go, go." Sarah didn't ask questions. She slammed the truck into drive, the tires spinning in the mud for a heart-stopping moment before finally finding purchase. We fishtailed onto the road, the back end sliding dangerously close to the ditch before Sarah straightened us out. As we sped away, I looked in the side mirror. There, at the edge of the woods, stood the old man. He wasn't chasing us anymore. He just stood there, watching us drive away, that terrifying grin still on his face. Then as we rounded a bend, he was gone. We drove for hours, not stopping until we reached the nearest town. We reported what happened to the police, but they found nothing. No house in the woods, no creepy old man. They put it down to stress and lack of sleep, a shared hallucination brought on by the dangerous driving conditions. But I know what I saw. I know what we escaped from. And I'll never forget the chill that ran down my spine when I saw those photographs, or the inhuman speed with which that old man chased me through the woods. We don't go camping anymore. We stick to well-traveled roads and well-lit cities. But sometimes, when it's raining hard and the power flickers, I can't help but think of that house in the woods. I wonder if it's still there, if that thing is still waiting for unsuspecting travelers to knock on its door. And I wonder, with a fear that never quite goes away, if someday, somehow, it might find us again. So if you're ever driving on a stormy night and your car breaks down on a lonely road, be careful who you ask for help. Because sometimes, the real monsters aren't in the storm. They're waiting for you to knock on their door. The first knock was so soft, I almost missed it over the sound of rain hammering against the roof. I paused, my hand hovering over the TV remote, straining to listen. There it was again, a gentle tap, 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 barely audible above the storm raging outside. I glanced at the clock, 11:43 p.m. Who could be at my door this late, especially in this weather? I'd been home alone all evening, my roommate away for the weekend. The storm had been building for hours, the wind howling around the corners of our old house, making the windows rattle in their frames. I'd been grateful for the distraction of mindless TV to keep my imagination from running wild. But now, as I stood there listening to that soft, persistent knocking, I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the draft seeping under the door. "Hello?" I called out, not moving from my spot on the couch. "Who's there?" No answer, just another series of gentle knocks. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. It was probably nothing. Maybe a branch blown loose by the wind, tapping against the door, or a neighbor who'd locked themselves out, desperate for shelter from the storm. Slowly, I made my way to the front door. Through the peephole, I could see nothing but darkness and the silver sheets of rain illuminated by our porch light. "Is someone there?" I asked again, my hand on the doorknob. Silence. Then, just as I was about to turn away, I heard it. A voice, so quiet I almost thought I'd imagined it. "Please," it whispered. "Let me in." My blood ran cold. The voice didn't sound like any of my neighbors. It was high-pitched, almost childlike, but with an odd, grating quality that set my teeth on edge. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "What do you want?" "Please," the voice came again, louder this time. "I'm so cold, so wet. Let me in." Every instinct I had was screaming at me to back away, to lock every door and window in the house. But another part of me, the part that couldn't bear the thought of leaving someone out in this storm, made me hesitate. "I'm sorry," I said, "but I can't open the door to a stranger. Is there someone I can call for you? The police, maybe?" A sound came then that made my heart nearly stop. It was a laugh, but not one of mirth or even irony. It was a cold, hollow sound that seemed to suck all the warmth from the air around me. "No police," the voice said, suddenly deeper, no longer even attempting to sound human. "No one but you. Let me in." The last three words were punctuated by thunderous blows to the door, so powerful I felt them reverberate through the floor. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet in my haste to get away. The pounding continued, growing louder and more frenzied with each passing second. I could hear the wood of the door creaking and splintering under the onslaught. I ran to the kitchen, fumbling for my phone with shaking hands. But as I tried to dial 911, I realized with horror that there was no signal. The storm must have knocked out the cell towers. A deafening crack echoed through the house, and I knew the door had given way. Heavy footsteps thudded on the hardwood floor of the entryway, accompanied by a sound like wet cloth dragging across the ground. I looked around wildly, searching for a weapon, an escape route, anything. My eyes fell on the back door. It was my only chance. I bolted for it, not daring to look behind me. I could hear it coming, its breathing loud and ragged, far too close for comfort. My hands shook as I fumbled with the lock, precious seconds ticking by as I struggled to open the door. Finally, it swung open, and I plunged out into the storm. The rain was coming down in sheets, instantly soaking me to the bone. The wind howled, nearly drowning out the inhuman shriek of rage that came from inside the house. I ran blindly through our backyard, my feet slipping in the mud. I had no plan, no destination in mind. My only thought was to get as far away from that thing as possible. I reached the edge of our property, where a dense line of trees marked the beginning of the woods behind our house. I hesitated for a split second, the darkness between the trees looking even more impenetrable than the stormy night. Another shriek, closer this time, made the decision for me. I plunged into the woods, branches whipping at my face as I ran. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that dark, wet labyrinth. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but still I pushed on, terrified of what might happen if I stopped. Eventually, I burst out of the tree line and found myself on a road. In the distance, I could see lights, a gas station, its fluorescent glow a beacon of hope in the darkness. I staggered towards it, relief flooding through me as I saw a police car parked out front. I was safe. I was going to be okay. As I approached, the officer stepped out of his car, concern etched on his face. "Are you all right, miss?" he asked, taking in my bedraggled appearance. I opened my mouth to respond, to pour out the whole terrifying story, but something made me stop. Over the officer's shoulder, I saw movement in the shadows beyond the gas station's bright lights. A figure stood there, tall and misshapen, its form seeming to shift and writhe in the darkness. As I watched, frozen in terror, it raised a hand. No, not a hand, a mass of writhing tentacles, and pressed a finger to where its mouth should be. The message was clear. Say nothing or else. I looked back at the officer, who was still waiting for my response. I'm fine, I stammered. Just got caught in the storm, took a wrong turn on my walk. The officer didn't look entirely convinced, but he nodded. "Well, let's get you inside and dried off. We can call someone to come get you." As he led me towards the gas station, I couldn't resist one last glance over my shoulder. The figure was gone, but I could have sworn I heard that cold, hollow laugh carried on the wind. I spent that night in the gas station, wrapped in a scratchy blanket the attendant found in the back, waiting for the storm to pass. I didn't tell anyone what had really happened. Who would believe me? When morning came and the rain finally stopped, I made my way back home. The front door was intact, showing no signs of the violent entry I'd witnessed the night before. Inside, everything was as I'd left it. There were no muddy footprints, no signs of an intruder. Had I imagined it all? Was it just a vivid nightmare brought on by the storm and too many late-night horror movies? But then I saw it. There, on the floor just inside the front door, was a single, long, black feather. As I picked it up, it seemed to writhe between my fingers, as if it were alive. I dropped it with a gasp and watched as it dissolved into a puddle of inky black liquid that quickly evaporated, leaving no trace behind. In that moment, I knew. It hadn't been a dream. It was real, all of it. And whatever that thing was, it wasn't finished with me. I moved out of that house the very next day. I told my roommate and my family that I just needed a change of scenery. But the truth is, I couldn't bear to spend another night there wondering if that thing would come back. Even now, years later, I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, my heart racing, sure that I've heard that soft tap, tap, tap at my door. And every time there's a storm, I make sure all my doors and windows are locked tight, because I know the truth that most people don't. Sometimes, the monsters that come knocking in the night are all too real, and once they've found you, they never truly let you go. The distant echo of footsteps jolted me from my half-asleep state. I blinked, trying to focus on the security monitors in front of me. The mall had been closed for hours, its vast corridors empty and dark. Yet there it was again, the unmistakable sound of someone walking, their steps echoing through the empty building. I'd been working as a night security guard at Willowbrook Mall for about 6 months. It wasn't the most exciting job, but it paid the bills. Most nights, I'd just make my rounds, check the locks, and spend the rest of the time watching Netflix on my phone. But tonight was different. The storm outside had been raging for hours, rain lashing against the skylights and thunder rumbling overhead. It was the kind of night that made you grateful to be indoors, even if that meant being alone in a creepy, empty mall. I leaned closer to the monitors, scanning each screen carefully. Nothing seemed out of place. The food court was deserted, chairs neatly stacked on tables. The fountain in the center court was still, its waters dark and silent. Even the toy store, usually so vibrant during the day, looked sad and abandoned in the dim emergency lighting. But there it was again. That sound. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere on the second floor. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, my heart beginning to race. It was probably nothing, I told myself. Maybe some merchandise had fallen off a shelf or a stray cat had somehow gotten in. But as I made my way up the motionless escalator, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The second floor was even darker than the first, the emergency lights casting long, eerie shadows. I swept my flashlight back and forth, its beam cutting through the darkness. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and uncertain in the vast space. "Security? Is anyone there?" Silence. Then, just as I was about to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing, I heard it. A voice, soft and distant, coming from the direction of the department store at the end of the corridor. "Help me," it said, barely more than a whisper. I froze, my flashlight beam shaking slightly. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is security. The mall is closed. You need to leave immediately." "Please," the voice came again, louder this time. "I'm lost. I can't find my way out." Against my better judgment, I started walking towards the sound. The department store loomed ahead, its entrance a gaping maw of darkness. As I got closer, I could see that the security gate was up. That was impossible. I'd checked it myself during my last round. I stepped into the store, my flashlight illuminating racks of clothing and shelves of merchandise. "Hello," I called out again. "Where are you?" A movement caught my eye, a flash of white disappearing behind a display of mannequins. I hurried towards it, my heart pounding in my chest. As I rounded the corner, I saw a small figure huddled on the floor. It was a child, a little girl in a white dress, her face hidden in her hands. "Hey there," I said softly, crouching down to her level. "Are you okay? How did you get in here?" The girl didn't respond. She just sat there, completely still, her face still hidden. "It's all right," I continued, reaching out a hand. "I'm here to help. Let's get you out of here and find your parents, okay?" Slowly, the girl lowered her hands. I felt my blood run cold. Where her face should have been, there was only a smooth, blank expanse of skin. I scrambled backward, nearly dropping my flashlight in shock. The girl, if you could call it that, stood up, its movements jerky and unnatural. It took a step towards me, its head tilting to one side at an impossible angle. "What the hell?" I gasped, my back hitting a clothing rack. Hangers clattered to the floor around me. The thing that looked like a little girl opened its mouth, a dark, gaping hole appearing in its featureless face. From it came a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my days. It was like 1,000 voices screaming in agony. All at once, I didn't think, I just ran. I sprinted out of the department store, not daring to look back. I could hear it behind me, its footsteps no longer slow and deliberate but rapid, gaining on me with inhuman speed. I reached the escalator and practically flew down it, taking the steps 3 at a time. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. The thing was at the top of the escalator, but it wasn't using the steps. It was crawling down the handrail on all fours, its body contorting in ways that defied physics. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, my lungs burning, my heart feeling like it might burst from my chest. I could see the exit ahead, the glass doors promising safety beyond. Just as I reached them, I heard a crash behind me. I turned to see the thing had leaped from the escalator, landing on a kiosk and crushing it beneath its weight. It stood up slowly, its blank face turning towards me. With shaking hands, I fumbled for my keys, trying to find the one that would unlock the door. I could hear it coming closer, its footsteps echoing in the empty mall. Finally, I found the right key. I shoved it into the lock, turned it, and burst out into the stormy night. I didn't stop running until I reached my car in the far corner of the parking lot. As I fumbled with my car keys, I looked back at the mall. There, pressed against the glass doors, was the faceless child. It stood perfectly still, watching me. Then, slowly, it raised one hand and waved. I got into my car and drove away as fast as I could, not caring about the speed limit or the rain-slicked roads. I didn't stop until I was miles away, pulling into a 24-hour diner where I spent the rest of the night, jumping at every sound and shadow. I never went back to that job. I called the next day and quit, making up some excuse about a family emergency. I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. Who would believe me? But sometimes, late at night when the wind is howling and the rain is pounding against my windows, I think about that mall. I wonder if that thing is still there, wandering the empty corridors, waiting for someone else to hear its cry for help. And I wonder, with a fear that never quite goes away, if someday, somehow, it might find me again. So if you're ever in a place that should be empty, a closed store, an abandoned building, or a dark and silent mall, and you hear footsteps or a voice calling for help, don't investigate. Don't try to be a hero. Just run. Run as fast and as far as you can, because some things that lurk in the darkness are best left undisturbed. And once they've seen you, they never forget. They never stop hunting. And sooner or later, when you least expect it, they'll find you. Just like I know, deep in my bones, that one day that faceless child will find me. And when it does, I can only hope I'll be ready. The old house loomed before us, a dark silhouette against the storm-ravaged sky. Lightning flashed, illuminating its decrepit facade for a split second before plunging it back into shadow. I glanced at my best friend, Mike, and saw my own apprehension mirrored in his eyes. "Maybe this isn't such a good idea," I said, having to raise my voice to be heard over the howling wind and pelting rain. Mike shook his head, rain dripping from his matted hair. "Come on, Alex. We've come this far. It's just an old house. What's the worst that could happen?" I wish I'd never found out the answer to that question. We'd been on our way back from a concert in the city when the storm hit. It came out of nowhere, turning the sky an ominous shade of green before unleashing its fury. The rain was so heavy we could barely see the road. And when we took a wrong turn trying to find a shortcut, we ended up hopelessly lost. That's when we saw it, the old Victorian house, standing alone at the end of a long, overgrown driveway. It looked abandoned, but we thought maybe we could at least take shelter on the porch until the storm passed. As we approached, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house seemed to loom larger with each step, its windows like dark, hollow eyes watching our approach. The porch steps creaked ominously under our feet, the sound barely audible over the raging storm. We huddled under the sagging porch roof, grateful for even this small respite from the rain. That's when I noticed the light. It was faint, barely visible through the grime-covered windows, but unmistakable. A flickering, warm glow coming from somewhere deep within the house. "Mike," I said, grabbing his arm. "Look, there's a light on inside." He squinted through the rain-streaked glass. "Holy shit. You're right. Maybe someone lives here after all." Before I could stop him, Mike was knocking on the door. The sound echoed unnaturally loud, seeming to reverberate through the entire house. We waited, the seconds stretching into minutes. Just as I was about to suggest we leave, we heard it, a faint sound, like someone calling for help. Mike's eyes widened. "Did you hear that? Someone's in trouble." He tried the doorknob, and to our surprise, it turned easily. The door swung open with a low, mournful creak. The interior of the house was dark, save for that faint, flickering light we'd seen from outside. It seemed to be coming from somewhere upstairs. "Hello?" Mike called out. "Is anyone there? Do you need help?" The answering cry was louder this time, definitely coming from upstairs. It sounded pained, desperate. I grabbed Mike's arm as he started to step inside. "Wait, this doesn't feel right. Maybe we should call the police." He shook off my hand. "There's no signal out here, you know that. Someone could be hurt. We can't just leave them." With that, he stepped over the threshold. After a moment's hesitation, I followed. I couldn't let him go alone, no matter how much every instinct was screaming at me to run. The floorboards groaned under our feet as we made our way through the foyer. The air inside was stale and heavy, thick with the smell of decay and something else. Something I couldn't quite place but that made my skin crawl. We found the stairs, a grand sweeping structure that might have been beautiful once but now was rotting and sagging. The light was definitely coming from the second floor, growing brighter as we ascended. At the top of the stairs, we paused. The crying had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the storm raging outside. "Hello," Mike called again. "We're here to help. Where are you?" A door at the end of the hallway slowly creaked open. The flickering light spilled out, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. We approached cautiously, peering into the room. It was some kind of study or library, the walls lined with towering bookshelves. In the center of the room was an old desk, and on it, the source of the light. A single candle, its flame dancing in a non-existent breeze. But what caught our attention was the figure huddled in the corner. It looked like an old woman, her face hidden by long, matted gray hair. "Ma'am," Mike said softly, stepping into the room. "Are you all right?" We heard crying. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge us in any way. I hung back in the doorway, a sense of dread growing in the pit of my stomach. Something was very, very wrong here. Mike crouched down next to the woman, reaching out to touch her shoulder. "Ma'am." What happened next will haunt me for the rest of my days. The woman's head snapped up, and I saw her face, or rather the lack of it. Where features should have been, there was only smooth, pale skin, broken by a gaping, tooth-lined maw that opened in a silent scream. Mike recoiled, falling backward with a cry of terror. The thing that wasn't a woman unfolded itself, its body stretching and contorting in impossible ways until it loomed over us, easily 8 feet tall. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I watched in horror as it reached for Mike with hands that ended in long, razor-sharp claws. Mike's scream snapped me out of my paralysis. I lunged forward, grabbing his arm and yanking him away just as those deadly claws slashed through the air where he had been. "Run!" I yelled, pulling him towards the door. We sprinted down the hallway, the thing's inhuman shrieks echoing behind us. I chanced a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. It was crawling after us, its body twisting and writhing as it scuttled along the walls and ceiling like some monstrous spider. We practically flew down the stairs, our feet barely touching the steps. I could hear it right behind us, its claws scraping against the wood. We burst out of the front door and into the storm, not stopping, not looking back. We ran through the overgrown yard, branches whipping at our faces, mud sucking at our feet. Finally, we reached the car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. The engine roared to life and I slammed the car into drive, tires spinning in the mud before finally finding purchase. As we sped away, I allowed myself one last look in the rearview mirror. There, standing in the middle of the road, was the thing from the house. It raised one grotesquely long arm, almost as if it was waving goodbye. We drove for hours, not speaking, not stopping until we were far, far away from that house. We never spoke about what happened that night, not to each other, not to anyone. Who would believe us? But sometimes, late at night when the wind is howling and the shadows seem to move on their own, I think about that house. I wonder if it's still there, waiting for the next unlucky travelers to seek shelter from the storm. And I wonder, with a fear that never quite goes away, if that thing is still there too, waiting patiently for someone else to hear its cry for help. So if you're ever driving on a stormy night and you see an old, abandoned house, don't stop. Don't seek shelter. Keep driving, no matter how bad the weather gets. Because sometimes, the storm isn't the most dangerous thing out there, and some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again. The engine sputtered and died, leaving me stranded in the middle of the bridge. As if on cue, the sky opened up, unleashing a torrent of rain that turned the world into a watery blur. I sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, heart pounding in my chest. Of all the places to break down, this had to be the worst. I'd been driving for hours, trying to outrun both the storm and my own thoughts. The fight with my girlfriend, the stress of my job, the feeling that my life was spiraling out of control. I thought a long drive might clear my head. Instead, it had led me here, to this desolate bridge in the middle of nowhere, with angry clouds above and churning water below. I tried the key again, praying for the engine to turn over, but it was no use. The car was dead. I reached for my phone, already knowing what I'd find. No signal. Of course not. That would be too easy. Rain lashed against the windows, driven by a wind that seemed to want to push my car right off the bridge. I peered through the windshield, trying to gauge how far I was from either end. The bridge stretched out before and behind me, disappearing into the gloom. I couldn't see land in either direction. That's when I saw them. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, shadows playing in the rain. But as I squinted, I could make out shapes moving on the bridge. People. No, not people. The shapes were too tall, too thin, their movements too fluid to be human. They emerged from the mist like ghosts, dark silhouettes against the gray backdrop of the storm. There were 3 of them, spread out across the width of the bridge, moving towards my car with a slow, deliberate pace. My mouth went dry, my palms sweating despite the chill in the air. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but where could I go? I was trapped on this bridge, my dead car the only shelter from whatever was approaching. As they drew closer, I could make out more details, each one making my heart race faster. They were impossibly tall, at least 8 feet, with limbs that seemed too long and thin for their bodies. Their faces, I couldn't see their faces, just smooth, featureless expanses where features should have been. They reached my car, surrounding it. One stood at the front, one at the back, and one right outside my driver's side window. I held my breath, afraid that even the slightest movement might provoke them. A sound cut through the pounding of the rain, a tapping on my window. Slow, deliberate, like the way they had walked. Tap, tap, tap. I turned, ever so slowly, to look out my window. The creature stood there, its blank face inches from the glass. As I watched, horrified, a seam appeared where its mouth should be. It split open, revealing rows of sharp, needle-like teeth. "Let us in," it said, its voice a hiss that somehow carried through the closed window and the roar of the storm. "We only want to help." I shook my head, unable to speak, unable to look away from that terrible mouth. The creature tilted its head, an eerily human gesture that only served to emphasize how inhuman it truly was. "Your car is broken," it continued. "The storm is getting worse. Let us help you." "No," I managed to croak out. "No, thank you. I'm fine." The creature's mouth stretched wider, a grotesque parody of a smile. "Are you sure it's not safe out here? Anything could happen to you." The threat in its words was unmistakable. I glanced at the other 2 creatures. They had moved closer, pressing against the car. I could hear the metal groaning under their touch. "Please," I said, hating the tremor in my voice. "Please just leave me alone." The creature at my window leaned closer, its blank face filling my vision. "We can't do that," it said. You see, we're hungry. So very hungry. And you look delicious. Terror surged through me, breaking through the paralysis of fear. I lunged for the key, turning it desperately. To my shock and relief, the engine roared to life. I didn't stop to question this miracle. I slammed the car into drive and floored the accelerator. The creature shrieked, a sound that set my teeth on edge and made my vision blur. The car shot forward, and I felt a moment of resistance, then a sickening thud as I hit one of them. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I drove blindly through the rain, my headlights barely penetrating the gloom. I could hear things hitting the roof and sides of the car. Were they jumping on it? Throwing things? I didn't dare look. I just drove, faster than I'd ever driven in my life, praying to whatever might be listening that I'd reach the end of this nightmare bridge. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I saw it. The end of the bridge, solid ground ahead. I nearly cried with relief. As soon as my tires hit asphalt, the pounding on my car stopped. The shrieking faded away, replaced by the steady drumming of rain. I didn't slow down, didn't look back. I just kept driving, putting as much distance between me and that bridge as I could. I drove all night, through the storm and beyond. When the sun finally rose, I found myself in a small town I didn't recognize. I pulled into a diner parking lot, my hands shaking as I turned off the engine. In the harsh light of day, I examined my car. There were dents all over the roof and hood and long scratches down the sides. The back window was cracked, spiderweb patterns spreading across the glass. But it was the smear of something dark and viscous across the front bumper that made my stomach turn. I couldn't bring myself to look at it too closely. I never reported what happened. Who would believe me? I told my girlfriend I'd had an accident, swerved to avoid an animal on a rainy night. She was just relieved I was okay. But I'm not okay. Not really. I can't sleep without seeing those faceless creatures in my dreams. I can't drive over bridges without breaking into a cold sweat. And every time it rains, I find myself checking the shadows, sure that I'll see those tall, thin shapes emerging from the gloom. I don't know what those things were, or why they chose me that night. Were they some kind of monsters, aliens, demons, or something else entirely, something our human minds can't comprehend? All I know is that they're out there, waiting on lonely bridges and deserted roads, waiting for someone's car to break down, for someone to be vulnerable and alone, waiting to help. So if you're ever driving late at night and your car breaks down in the middle of nowhere, be careful. Don't trust the shapes you see in the rain. Don't listen to the voices that offer help. And whatever you do, don't let them in, because once they've found you, they'll never truly let you go. And the next time your car breaks down, they might not take no for an answer. A flash of lightning illuminated the cave entrance, a gaping maw in the mountainside that seemed to beckon me forward. I hesitated, caught between the fury of the storm at my back and the unknown darkness ahead. Another crack of thunder made the decision for me. I plunged into the cavern, the sound of my ragged breathing echoing off the damp stone walls. I hadn't planned on going spelunking that day. It was supposed to be a simple day hike, a chance to clear my head and escape the pressures of my job and my failing relationship. But as I climbed higher into the mountains, the weather turned treacherous. The blue sky darkened to an ominous gray, and before I knew it, I was caught in one of the most violent storms I'd ever seen. Now, as I stood just inside the cave entrance, watching sheets of rain lash the forest outside, I tried to calm my racing heart. It's just a storm, I told myself. It'll pass soon, and then I can make my way back down the mountain. I fumbled in my backpack for my flashlight, grateful that I'd thought to pack it. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a passage that stretched deeper into the mountain. Curious despite my apprehension, I took a few steps forward. That's when I saw them. At first, I thought they were just odd formations in the rock, tricks of light and shadow. Moved my flashlight beam across the cave wall. I realized I was looking at paintings. Ancient paintings, crude yet eerily lifelike, depicting scenes I couldn't quite comprehend. There were human figures, stick-like and primitive, arranged in what looked like a circle. In the center of the circle was something else, something that made my skin crawl just looking at it. It was larger than the human figures, its form a twisted mass of tentacles, or perhaps elongated limbs. Where its head should have been, the painting showed only a dark void. I stepped closer, fascinated despite the unease growing in the pit of my stomach. As I examined the paintings, I noticed something odd. They seemed to be moving, ever so slightly, as if the figures were shifting position when I wasn't looking directly at them. I blinked hard, sure I was imagining things. When I looked again, the paintings were still, just ancient art on a cave wall, nothing more. I laughed nervously, the sound echoing in the empty cavern. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself. "It's just your imagination playing tricks on you." But as I turned to head back to the cave entrance, my flashlight beam caught something that made my blood run cold. There, on the opposite wall, was a handprint, a fresh handprint, still glistening wetly in the light. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. That hadn't been there before, I was sure of it. I swept my flashlight around the cave, half expecting to see someone, or something, lurking in the shadows. But I was alone. Or was I? A sound reached my ears then, so faint I almost missed it. A whisper, like dry leaves skittering across stone. It seemed to be coming from deeper within the cave. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out of the cave and take my chances with the storm. But a morbid curiosity kept me rooted to the spot. What if someone was hurt back there? What if they needed help? "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. "Is someone there?" The whispering stopped abruptly. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, just as I was about to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing, I heard it. A voice, distant and distorted, as if coming from the bottom of a deep well. "Help us," it said. "Please, help us." I took a step forward, then another. The beam of my flashlight danced across the cave walls, illuminating more of those unsettling paintings. They seemed to watch me as I passed, their crude faces twisted in expressions of fear or perhaps warning. The passage narrowed as I went deeper, the ceiling lowering until I had to stoop to avoid hitting my head. Grew colder, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else, something I couldn't quite identify but that made my nose wrinkle in disgust. "Where are you?" I called out. "Keep talking so I can find you." "Here," the voice replied, closer now. "We're here. Please hurry." I rounded a corner and found myself in a large chamber. My flashlight beam couldn't reach the far walls or the ceiling, giving the unsettling impression that the room went on forever. In the center of the chamber was a pool of dark, still water, and there, at the edge of the pool, I saw them. 3 figures, huddled together as if for warmth. They were turned away from me, their forms indistinct in the dim light. "Are you okay?" I asked, approaching cautiously. "Are you hurt? Do you need help getting out of here?" They didn't respond. They didn't move at all. As I got closer, I noticed something odd about their posture. They seemed too still, too rigid, almost like... My flashlight beam fell fully on them, and I realized with horror that they weren't people at all. They were statues, crude things of clay and stone. But they were positioned exactly as living people would be, their unseeing eyes fixed on the dark water of the pool. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. If these weren't the source of the voice I'd heard, then what? A flash from the pool made me jump. I swung my flashlight toward the sound, just in time to see ripples spreading across the surface of the water. Something had disturbed it, something large. As I watched, paralyzed with fear, a shape began to emerge from the pool. It rose slowly, water cascading off its form in oily rivulets. It was huge, its body a writhing mass of tentacles or perhaps impossibly elongated limbs, and its head. I screamed. I couldn't help it. Where its head should have been, there was only a swirling vortex of darkness, a void that seemed to draw in all light and hope. It was the thing from the paintings, the ancient, terrible thing that the primitive artists had tried to capture on the cave walls. And it was real. It was here. "Thank you for coming," it said, its voice the same one that had called for help. But now I could hear the malevolence in it, the ancient hunger. "We've been waiting so long for someone to join us." I turned and ran, dropping my flashlight in my panic. I fled through the dark passages, my hands scraping against the rock walls as I desperately sought the way out. Behind me, I could hear it coming, its many limbs scrabbling against the stone, its bulk squeezing through passages that should have been too small for it. By some miracle, I found the cave entrance, burst out into the storm, rain lashing my face and wind howling in my ears. But I didn't stop. I ran down the mountain, slipping and sliding on the wet rocks, branches whipping at my face as I plunged through the underbrush. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, parked at the trailhead. As I fumbled with my keys, I glanced back up the mountain. There, silhouetted against the stormy sky, I saw a shape, a massive, writhing shape that seemed to dwarf the trees around it. I got in my car and drove away as fast as I could, not stopping until I was miles away from that cursed mountain. I never told anyone what happened that day. Who would believe me? But I know what I saw. I know what's waiting in that cave, hungry and patient, ready to lure in the next unsuspecting hiker who seeks shelter from the storm. So if you're ever hiking in the mountains and you find yourself caught in a sudden storm, be careful where you seek shelter. Some caves are better left unexplored, and some things that call for help don't really need saving at all. They're just hungry, and they've been waiting a very, very long time for dinner to arrive. The stuffed bear sat on my doorstep, its black button eyes staring blankly into the stormy night. I stood frozen, one hand on the doorknob, as rain pelted down around me. Where had it come from? And more importantly, where was the child it belonged to? I'd been home alone all evening, trying to distract myself from the raging storm outside with mindless TV shows. The power had flickered a few times, but thankfully had stayed on. It was just past midnight when I heard it, a sound so faint I almost missed it over the howling wind and pounding rain. A child's cry. At first I thought I'd imagined it, but then I heard it again, louder this time. It seemed to be coming from right outside my front door. Without thinking, I rushed to open it, expecting to find a lost child seeking shelter from the storm. Instead, I found nothing. Just the rain-soaked porch and the stuffed bear, looking for all the world like it had been carefully placed there. I picked up the toy, water dripping from its matted fur. It was old, well-loved, the kind of stuffed animal a child would be devastated to lose. But there was no child in sight. "Hello," I called out, peering into the darkness. "Is anyone there?" The only answer was a crack of thunder that shook the windows. I stepped back inside, clutching the bear, and closed the door. My heart was racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. I set the bear on the coffee table and grabbed my phone, intending to call the police. But as I dialed, I realized there was no signal. The storm must have knocked out the cell towers. Another cry pierced the night, louder this time. It was definitely coming from outside. I rushed to the window, pulling back the curtain to look out. For a moment, I saw nothing but rain and darkness. Then, a flash of lightning illuminated the street, and I saw her, a little girl, no more than 6 or 7, standing in the middle of the road. She was soaked to the bone, her long dark hair plastered to her face, and she was staring directly at my house. Without hesitation, I grabbed my raincoat and ran outside. Child or no child, I couldn't leave her out there in this storm. "Hey," I called out, jogging towards her. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" As I got closer, I realized something was off. The girl hadn't moved, hadn't reacted to my voice at all. She just stood there, rain streaming down her face, her eyes fixed on a point just over my shoulder. I slowed my approach, a chill that had nothing to do with the rain running down my spine. "Sweetie, can you hear me?" I was just a few feet away from her now, close enough to see that her skin was pale, almost translucent in the dim light. Close enough to notice that she wasn't blinking, wasn't even seeming to breathe. Suddenly, her head snapped towards me, her eyes locking onto mine. I stumbled backward. A scream caught in my throat. Her eyes were completely black. No whites, no iris, just endless pools of darkness. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice a raspy whisper that somehow carried over the storm. Who?" I stammered, my feet rooted to the spot in terror. "My bear," she said. "You took him. I want him back." I opened my mouth to respond, to tell her the bear was in my house, that she could have it back. But before I could speak, she was gone, not running away, not fading into the darkness. She simply wasn't there anymore, as if she'd never existed at all. I ran back to my house, slamming the door behind me and locking it with shaking hands. I leaned against it, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. What had I just seen? It couldn't be real. It had to be a hallucination, a trick of the light and the storm. But as I turned around, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The bear was gone. In its place, on the coffee table, was a puddle of water. And next to it, written in what looked horribly like blood, were 2 words, "Thank you." I didn't sleep that night. I sat huddled on my couch, every light in the house blazing, jumping at every creak and groan of the old building settling. When dawn finally broke, I was exhausted, my eyes gritty from lack of sleep and too much crying. In the light of day, it all seemed absurd. A ghost child, a haunted stuffed animal. It had to have been a dream, a vivid nightmare brought on by stress and the storm. But as I went to make coffee, desperate for caffeine, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. There, on my front porch, visible through the kitchen window, was a small wet footprint. A child's footprint. I called in sick to work that day. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving the house. Instead, I spent hours researching local history, looking for any stories of missing children, of accidents on my street. What I found chilled me to the bone. 50 years ago, almost to the day, a little girl had gone missing in this very neighborhood. She had last been seen chasing after her favorite toy, a stuffed bear, which had blown away in a storm. Neither she nor the bear were ever found. As I stared at the old newspaper article, my hands shaking, I heard something that made my heart stop, a child's laughter coming from right outside my front door. I looked up, dreading what I might see. There, peering in through my window, was the girl. She was smiling now, her black eyes crinkled at the corners. In her arms, she clutched the stuffed bear. As I watched, paralyzed with fear, she raised one hand and waved. Then, slowly, she faded away, taking the bear with her. I moved out of that house the very next day. I told my landlord some story about a job transfer, about needing to be closer to family. I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth. Even now, years later, I can't drive down that street without my heart racing. I avoid going out in storms, and I've developed an irrational fear of stuffed animals. But sometimes, late at night when the wind is howling and rain is lashing against my windows, I swear I can hear a child's laughter. And in those moments, I wonder if she's still out there, still looking for someone to return her lost toy. So if you ever find a stuffed animal sitting on your doorstep on a stormy night, think twice before you bring it inside. Some lost things are better left unfound, and some spirits, once invited in, never truly leave. The first hidden door I discovered was behind the old mahogany bookcase in the study. I stood there, frozen in disbelief, as the massive piece of furniture swung open with an ominous creak, revealing a dark passage beyond. That was the moment I realized the house I just bought was hiding more secrets than I could have ever imagined. It had seemed like such a good deal at the time. A sprawling Victorian mansion on the outskirts of town, going for a fraction of what it should have cost. The real estate agent had been vague about its history, muttering something about the previous owners leaving in a hurry, but I was too excited about the prospect of owning such a beautiful home to ask too many questions. Now, as I stood at the threshold of that hidden passage, I began to understand why the price had been so low. I'd been living in the house for about a week when I made my first discovery. I was reorganizing the study, trying to make space for my own books among the volumes left behind by the previous owners. As I was moving the heavy bookcase, my hand brushed against something on its back. A small, almost imperceptible lever. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled it, and that's when the bookcase swung open, nearly knocking me off my feet. The passage beyond was dark and musty, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. I hesitated for a moment, every horror movie I'd ever seen flashing through my mind, but the allure of the unknown was too strong to resist. I grabbed a flashlight from my desk drawer and stepped into the passage. The beam of light revealed rough stone walls covered in a thick layer of cobwebs. The floor was packed dirt, uneven and treacherous. I moved slowly, careful not to trip. The passage twisted and turned, leading deeper into the bowels of the house. I lost all sense of direction, unsure if I was heading towards the front of the property or the back. Just as I was considering turning back, I came to another door. This one was made of heavy wood, reinforced with iron bands. It looked ancient, far older than the house itself. There was no visible handle or lock, just a series of strange symbols carved into its surface. I ran my fingers over the carvings, trying to make sense of them. As I traced the final symbol, I heard a click. The door swung open, revealing a room that took my breath away. It was a vast chamber, far larger than should have been possible given the dimensions of the house above. The walls were lined with bookshelves that stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with volumes that looked centuries old. In the center of the room stood a massive stone table, its surface covered in strange instruments and open books. But what caught my eye was the far wall. It was covered in an intricate mural, depicting scenes that made my skin crawl. Creatures that defied description, writhing masses of tentacles and eyes. Humans bowing before them in supplication or fleeing in terror. And at the center of it all, a swirling vortex that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly light. I approached the mural, drawn to it despite the dread building in my stomach. As I got closer, I realized with horror that the light wasn't a trick of the paint. It was actually glowing, pulsing in a rhythm that matched the beating of my heart. I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched the surface of the mural. The moment my fingers made contact, a jolt of energy surged through me. Images flashed through my mind, glimpses of other worlds, of beings too vast and terrible to comprehend. I yanked my hand away, stumbling backward. My foot caught on something, and I fell, hitting my head on the edge of the stone table. Everything went black. When I came to, I was back in the study, lying on the floor in front of the still open bookcase. My head throbbed, and for a moment, I wondered if I had dreamed the whole thing. But the dirt on my clothes and the lingering scent of that underground chamber told me it had been all too real. I slammed the bookcase shut, my hands shaking. What had I stumbled upon? What kind of people had lived in this house before me? Over the next few days, I tried to convince myself to leave, to sell the house and never look back. But every time I thought about leaving, I felt a pull, an irresistible urge to explore further. There had to be more hidden rooms, more secrets waiting to be uncovered, and I was right. Over the next week, I discovered no less than 5 more hidden doors throughout the house. Each one led to a different chamber, each more bizarre and unsettling than the last. One room was filled with glass cases containing specimens I couldn't begin to identify. Things that looked like crosses between insects and reptiles, but far larger than any earthly creature. Another held a collection of artifacts that seemed to defy the laws of physics, objects that moved on their own or changed shape when I wasn't looking directly at them. But it was the room I found in the basement that truly terrified me. It was a small, circular chamber, its walls covered in mirrors. In the center stood a pedestal, and on that pedestal sat a book. The book was bound in what looked disturbingly like human skin, its pages yellowed with age. As I approached it, I could hear a faint whispering, as if the book itself was trying to speak to me. With trembling hands, I opened it. The pages were filled with writing in a language I'd never seen before, accompanied by diagrams that made my eyes hurt to look at. But somehow, impossibly, I could understand what it was saying. It was a guide, a manual for opening doorways, not just the hidden doors in the house, but doorways to other places, other worlds, and the things that lived in those worlds. The book described them in terrifying detail. I slammed the book shut, my heart racing. This was too much. I had to get out of there, had to get away from this house and all its impossible secrets. But as I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something in one of the mirrors. It wasn't my reflection staring back at me. It was, something else. Something with too many eyes and a mouth full of needle-like teeth. I ran, scrambling up the basement stairs and through the house. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for breath in the cool night air. That was 3 days ago. I haven't been back inside since then. I've been sleeping in my car, trying to work up the courage to either go back in and face whatever is in that house, or to run as far away as I can. But I know deep down that it's too late for running. Whatever was in that book, whatever I saw in that mirror, it's aware of me now. I opened doors that were never meant to be opened, and now I have to deal with the consequences. So I sit here, writing this as a warning to anyone who might come across it. If you ever find a house that seems too good to be true, a place with more rooms than it should have and secrets hiding behind every wall, don't let curiosity get the better of you. Some doors are meant to stay closed. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Because once you open those doors, once you uncover those secrets, there's no going back. And the things waiting on the other side, they're always hungry for new victims. I think I hear something moving inside the house now. I think it's time for me to face what I've unleashed. If anyone finds this, remember my story. And whatever you do, don't buy the house at the end of Willow Street. Some properties come with far too high a price. The woman's eyes were wild with terror as she pounded on the gas station door. Rain plastered her hair to her face, and she kept glancing over her shoulder as if expecting something to emerge from the darkness. I hesitated, my hand on the lock. It was past midnight, and I was the only one working the graveyard shift. Opening the door went against every safety protocol, but the desperation in her face made me pause. I've been working at Pete's Gas & Go for about 6 months now, and I've seen my fair share of strange customers. Drunk college kids stumbling in at 3 a.m. for snacks, truckers with 1,000-yard stares buying their 5th cup of coffee, even the occasional shady character that made me glad for the bulletproof glass around the register. But I'd never seen anyone like this woman. She couldn't have been much older than me, maybe mid-20s, but the fear in her eyes made her look both younger and older at the same time. Her clothes were soaked through, mud caking her jeans and sneakers. There was a wild, hunted look about her that set off every alarm bell in my head. Against my better judgment, I cracked the door open. "Ma'am, are you okay?" She practically fell into the store, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Please," she panted, "you have to help me. They're after me." I quickly locked the door behind her, my heart racing. "Who's after you? Should I call the police?" She shook her head violently, sending droplets of water flying. No police. They wouldn't believe me. No one would." I led her to the small seating area where truckers sometimes ate their microwave burritos. She collapsed into a chair, her whole body shaking. I grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler and handed it to her. "Here, drink this. Take a deep breath and tell me what's going on." She gulped down half the bottle before speaking. "My name's Sarah. I was driving home from visiting my sister. The storm hit, and I took a wrong turn trying to find a shortcut." I nodded, encouraging her to continue. Outside, the rain pounded against the windows, and lightning illuminated the empty parking lot in brief, electric flashes. I ended up on this old road, miles from anywhere. My car, it just died, right in the middle of nowhere. She paused, her eyes growing distant. That's when I saw them. A chill ran down my spine. "Saw who?" Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. "They came out of the woods. At first, I thought they were people, maybe locals coming to help, but the way they moved..." She shuddered. It wasn't right, too fluid, like their bones weren't solid, and their faces. She trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her it was just her imagination playing tricks on her in the storm, but something in her voice, in the raw terror in her eyes, made me hold my tongue. "What about their faces?" I asked softly. "They didn't have any," she whispered. "Just smooth, blank skin where features should be. But somehow, I could feel them looking at me. Hungry, so hungry." I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. This had to be some kind of delusion, right? Maybe she'd hit her head when her car broke down, or maybe, A movement outside caught my eye. I turned to look, and for a split second, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure, impossibly tall and thin, gliding across the parking lot. Its head turned towards the store, and even through the rain-streaked glass, I could see the smooth, featureless expanse where a face should have been. I blinked, and it was gone. Just an empty parking lot and the relentless rain. When I turned back to Sarah, she was staring at me with wide eyes. "You saw it, didn't you?" she whispered. I opened my mouth to deny it, to rationalize what I'd seen, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself nodding. Sarah let out a choked sob. "They followed me. Oh God, they followed me here." I tried to stay calm, to think rationally. "Okay, let's call the police. Whatever's out there, they can help." I reached for the phone behind the counter, but as I did, the lights flickered. Once, twice, and then we were plunged into darkness. The hum of the refrigerators died, leaving us in eerie silence broken only by the sound of rain and our own ragged breathing. "They're here," Sarah whimpered. I fumbled for the flashlight I kept under the counter, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. As the beam cut through the darkness, I saw something that made my heart stop. Pressed against the glass door were three figures, tall, impossibly thin, their bodies swaying slightly as if moved by an unfelt breeze. And their faces, Sarah was right. There were no features, no eyes or nose or mouth, just smooth, pale skin stretched over elongated skulls. As I watched, frozen in terror, one of them raised a hand. Long, spindly fingers ended in sharp points that looked more like claws than nails. It pressed its hand against the glass, and to my horror, I saw the material begin to ripple and distort, as if it were melting. "The safe room," I gasped, suddenly remembering the reinforced storage area in the back. "Come on." I grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her towards the back of the store. We stumbled through the darkness, knocking over displays of chips and candy as we went. Behind us, I heard the sound of shattering glass and knew the creatures had broken through the door. We reached the safe room just as I heard their footsteps entering the store. I shoved Sarah inside and followed, slamming the heavy metal door shut and engaging the multiple locks. For a moment, we stood there in the darkness, our ragged breathing the only sound. Then, slowly, a scratching noise began on the other side of the door, soft at first, then growing louder, more insistent. "What do they want?" I whispered. Sarah's voice was hollow with despair. "Us. They want us." The scratching turned to pounding, the whole door shuddering with each impact. I don't know how long we huddled there in the dark, listening to those things try to break through. It felt like hours. Just when I thought the door couldn't take much more, the pounding stopped. An eerie silence fell, broken only by a sound that chilled me to my core. A voice, raspy and inhuman, speaking from just outside the door. "We can wait," it said. "We have all the time in the world." I don't know how long we've been in here now. My phone died hours ago, and the emergency lights in the safe room are starting to dim. Sarah's asleep, or maybe unconscious. I can't bring myself to check. I'm writing this on the back of old invoices I found in here, using a pen that's quickly running out of ink. I don't know if anyone will ever find this, but I need to leave a record of what happened, of what's out there. If you're reading this, if you've come to investigate why the gas go has gone dark, please be careful. Don't trust what you see in the shadows. Don't open this door unless you're absolutely sure it's safe. And if you hear scratching in the night, if you see tall, thin figures with no faces, run. Run as fast and as far as you can, because they're patient and they're hungry, and they're always, always watching. The figure stood motionless in the downpour, a dark silhouette against the gray curtain of rain. I blinked, certain my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. But when I looked again, it was still there, standing at the edge of the woods that lined the lonely stretch of road. I'd been driving for hours, pushing through the relentless storm to get home after a grueling business trip. The monotony of the windshield wipers and the hiss of tires on wet asphalt had lulled me into a trance-like state. But the sight of that figure jolted me back to full alertness. As I drew closer, I could make out more details. It was tall, unnaturally so, its limbs too long and thin to be human. It wore what looked like a tattered black cloak that rippled in the wind. But it was the face, or rather, the lack of one, that made my blood run cold. Where features should have been, there was only a smooth, pale expanse of skin. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. Every instinct screamed at me to floor it, to speed past this impossible apparition. But as I approached, the figure suddenly moved. It turned its featureless face towards me and took a single, fluid step onto the road. I slammed on the brakes, my car fishtailing on the wet asphalt. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought I was going to hit it. But somehow, I managed to bring the car to a shuddering stop just inches from where it stood. Time seemed to stand still. Rain hammered on the roof of my car, but I barely heard it over the pounding of my own heart. The figure stood there, motionless, water streaming off its form. I couldn't tear my eyes away from that blank face. Even without eyes, I could feel it staring at me, through me. Then, slowly, it raised one impossibly long arm and pointed off into the woods. I don't know what possessed me in that moment. Fear, curiosity, some primal instinct I couldn't name. Whatever it was, I found myself reaching for the door handle. My rational mind screamed in protest, but my body moved as if controlled by someone or something else. I stepped out into the rain, instantly soaked to the bone. The figure towered over me, at least 8 feet tall. Up close, I could see that what I'd thought was a cloak was actually part of its body, a mass of writhing, shadowy tendrils that seemed to absorb the light around them. "What do you want?" I managed to croak out, my voice barely audible over the storm. The figure didn't respond, it just kept pointing into the woods. Then, with a movement so fast I almost missed it, it was gone. One moment it was there, the next it had vanished into the tree line. I stood there, rain streaming down my face, torn between the safety of my car and the unknown depths of the forest. Logic told me to get back in the car, to drive away and never look back. But something deeper, something I couldn't explain, pulled me towards the woods. Before I knew what I was doing, I was walking. Each step took me further from the road, deeper into the shadows beneath the trees. The rain lessened under the canopy, but an unnatural darkness seemed to close in around me. I don't know how long I walked. Time lost all meaning in that strange, shadow-filled place. The trees grew denser, their branches intertwining overhead to block out what little light remained. I stumbled over roots and rocks, my clothes snagging on thorny bushes. Just as I was about to turn back, to try and find my way out of this nightmare, I saw it, a clearing up ahead, illuminated by a pale, otherworldly light. And in the center of that clearing stood a structure that defied explanation. It looked like a doorway, but not one made by human hands. The frame was composed of twisted, gnarled wood that seemed to pulse with an inner light, and beyond the threshold, I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. It was as if reality itself was warped and distorted, a swirling vortex of colors and shapes that hurt my eyes to look at directly. The figure stood beside the doorway, its blank face turned towards me. As I watched, frozen in a mix of terror and awe, it extended one long-fingered hand towards me in a gesture that was unmistakably inviting. I took a step forward, then another. Some part of me knew I should be running, screaming, doing anything but approaching this impossible scene, but I couldn't stop. It was as if invisible strings were pulling me forward. As I got closer, I began to hear something. Whispers. Countless voices speaking in languages I didn't understand but somehow knew were ancient beyond imagining. They seemed to be coming from beyond the doorway, calling to me, promising what? Knowledge, power, things beyond human comprehension. I was just steps away from the threshold when a sound cut through the whispers. A car horn, loud and insistent, coming from the direction of the road. It was like a bucket of cold water, snapping me out of whatever trance I'd been in. I blinked, suddenly aware of where I was and what I was doing. The figure still stood there, its hand outstretched, but now I could see the malevolence in its posture. This wasn't an invitation, it was a trap. I turned and ran. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me at every step. Behind me, I heard an inhuman shriek of rage that made my blood run cold. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I knew that if I did, I'd be lost forever. Somehow, I found my way back to the road. My car was still there, its headlights cutting through the rain, the horn still blaring. As I burst out of the tree line, I saw someone standing next to it, a trucker, his face a mask of concern. "Hey, buddy," he called out. "You okay? I saw your car just sitting here and thought maybe you'd had an accident." I couldn't speak. I just stumbled to my car and collapsed into the driver's seat, gasping for breath. The trucker peered at me worriedly. "You sure you're all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." I managed a nod, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. "I'm fine," I croaked. "Just got turned around in the woods. Thank you for stopping." He didn't look convinced, but he nodded. "All right then. You be careful out there. Storm's getting worse." As he walked back to his truck, I chanced a glance at the woods. For a split second, I thought I saw something. A tall, thin shape among the trees. A pale, featureless face turned towards me. Then a flash of lightning lit up the sky, and it was gone. I started the car and drove away, not slowing down until I was miles from that stretch of road. I've never told anyone what happened that night. Who would believe me? Sometimes, I'm not even sure I believe it myself. But on stormy nights, when the wind howls and rain lashes against my windows, I find myself drawn to look outside. And sometimes, just sometimes, I see a tall, dark figure standing at the edge of the woods behind my house, one long arm raised, pointing into the darkness beyond. And I wonder, with a mixture of terror and longing. What might have happened if I'd taken that outstretched hand and stepped through the doorway? What wonders, or horrors, might I have seen? But then I remember the inhuman shriek of rage, the malevolence I sensed at the last moment, and I'm grateful for the trucker's timely intervention, because I know, deep in my bones, that if I'd crossed that threshold, I would have never returned. So I keep my doors locked and my curtains drawn on stormy nights. And if I ever find myself driving down a lonely road in the rain, I keep my eyes fixed firmly ahead, because some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some doors are meant to stay closed. The water crept up the basement stairs, inch by relentless inch. I stood at the top, watching helplessly as years of memories and mementos were slowly swallowed by the murky flood. But it wasn't the loss of possessions that sent a chill down my spine. It was the realization that the water seemed to be coming from somewhere it shouldn't, somewhere impossible. I'd lived in this house for nearly a decade, weathering countless storms without issue. But this one was different. The rain had been falling for days, a constant deluge that turned the world outside into a gray, sodden mess. At first, I wasn't worried. The house had always been dry, its foundation solid. But then I heard it, a low, gurgling sound coming from the basement. When I opened the door to investigate, I was met with a rush of cold, damp air and the sight of water steadily rising up the stairs. I spent the next few hours frantically trying to salvage what I could, hauling boxes and furniture up to the main floor. It was as I was making what I hoped would be my final trip down that I noticed something odd. The water wasn't just coming up through the usual spots, the drain in the floor, the small cracks in the walls. No, it seemed to be emanating from a specific point, a dark corner of the basement I'd never paid much attention to before. Curious, despite my exhaustion, I waded through the knee-deep water towards that corner. As I got closer, I realized there was something there, hidden behind an old shelving unit I'd never bothered to move. With a grunt of effort, I shoved the shelves aside. What I found made my heart skip a beat. There, set into the wall, was a door that absolutely should not have been there. It was made of some dark, water-stained wood, its surface covered in intricate carvings that seemed to writhe and shift in the dim light. An ornate brass handle gleamed dully, untarnished despite the moisture all around it. I stood there, water lapping at my thighs, staring at this impossible door. The rational part of my mind insisted that it couldn't be real, that I must be hallucinating from stress and lack of sleep. But I could feel the solid wood under my fingertips as I traced the strange symbols carved into its surface. That's when I noticed the water. It wasn't just rising around me, it was actively flowing out from under the door, as if an entire ocean lay on the other side. I knew I should leave, should get out of the basement and call. Who? The police, the fire department. Who would believe me about a mysterious, water-spewing door that had appeared in my basement? But curiosity, that fatal human flaw, got the better of me. Before I could talk myself out of it, I gripped the handle and turned. The door swung open with surprising ease, and I found myself face to face with nothing, just an impenetrable darkness that seemed to swallow the beam of my flashlight. But the sound, the sound. It was like standing at the edge of a vast, underground sea. I could hear waves crashing against distant shores, and something else, something that sounded disturbingly like voices, calling from somewhere in that darkness. I leaned forward, straining to hear what they were saying. That was my mistake. In an instant, the gentle flow of water became a raging torrent. It hit me like a physical blow, knocking me off my feet and pulling me towards the open door. I scrambled for purchase, my fingers scrabbling against the slick floor. But it was no use. The current was too strong. As I was swept towards that yawning blackness, I caught a glimpse of something moving in the depths, something massive, with too many limbs and eyes that glowed with an eldritch light. At the last second, My hand caught the door frame. I hung there, half in and half out of that impossible space, the roar of otherworldly waters filling my ears. With a desperate surge of strength, I managed to pull myself back and slam the door shut. The flow of water stopped instantly. I lay there on the basement floor, gasping for breath, my mind reeling from what I'd just experienced. Slowly, I became aware that the water level was dropping. Within minutes, it had receded entirely, leaving behind nothing but puddles and water-stained walls. And the door, it was still there, solid and real, mocking everything I thought I knew about the world. I spent the next few days in a daze, alternating between convincing myself it had all been some kind of stress-induced hallucination and standing in front of that door, my hand on the knob, wondering what would happen if I opened it again. I thought about calling someone, telling them what had happened. But every time I picked up the phone, the words died in my throat. Who would believe me? They'd think I was crazy. Hell, I wasn't entirely sure I wasn't crazy. It was on the third night that I heard it. A soft tapping coming from the basement. Tap, 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 like something gently knocking on the other side of that door. I tried to ignore it, burying my head under my pillow. But the tapping continued, growing louder, more insistent. Finally, unable to stand it any longer, I crept down to the basement. The door was vibrating slightly, the tapping now a steady rhythm that I could feel in my bones. And underneath that sound, I could hear voices again, whispering, calling, promising. I don't know how long I stood there, my hand hovering over the knob. Part of me was terrified, remembering the thing I'd glimpsed in that otherworldly sea. But another part, a part I didn't want to acknowledge, was fascinated. What lay beyond that door? What knowledge, what wonders, what horrors? In the end, it was a sudden silence that decided me. The tapping stopped, the whispers faded, and I was left alone in my quiet basement. Slowly, I turned away from the door and walked back upstairs. The next morning, I called a realtor. I couldn't stay in this house, not with that door in the basement, not with the constant temptation to open it again. I didn't tell the realtor about it, of course, just said I needed a change of scenery. As I write this, sitting in my new apartment across town, I can't help but wonder about the family that moved into my old house. Have they discovered the door yet? Have they been tempted to open it? Or is it lying dormant, waiting for the next big storm to reveal its presence? Sometimes, late at night, I find myself driving past my old house. I never stop, never get out of the car. I just slow down, peering at the basement windows, half expecting to see water gushing out, or tentacles writhing behind the glass. So far, all has been quiet, but I know it's only a matter of time, because that door is still there, hidden in the darkness of the basement, and whatever lies on the other side, it's patient. It can wait, and sooner or later, someone will open that door again. I just pray they're strong enough to close it. As for me, I've learned a valuable lesson. Some doors are meant to stay closed. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, because once you've glimpsed what lies beyond, you can never truly go back to the way things were before. So if you ever find a door where one shouldn't be, especially if it seems to be the source of an impossible flood, walk away. No matter how curious you are, no matter what promises you hear whispered from the other side, walk away and don't look back, because some waters run far deeper than we can imagine, and some tides, once unleashed, can never be turned back. The first footstep echoed through the empty house like a gunshot. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, straining to listen. It came again, a slow, deliberate step creaking across the floorboards above me. But that was impossible. I was supposed to be alone. I'd been house-sitting for my friend Sarah for a week, enjoying the solitude of her sprawling Victorian home on the outskirts of town. It was a welcome break from my cramped apartment and noisy neighbors. The The first few days had been blissfully peaceful, just me and the gentle creaking of the old house settling. But then the storm hit. It had been raging for 3 days now. Sheets of rain lashing against the windows, wind howling through the eaves. The power had flickered on and off, plunging the house into darkness for hours at a time. It was during one of these blackouts that I first heard the noises. At first, I dismissed them as the storm playing tricks on me. Old houses make all sorts of strange sounds, especially in bad weather. But as the days wore on, the noises became more distinct, more deliberate. Footsteps crossing the attic floor, the sound of furniture being moved, and once, terrifyingly, what sounded like a child's laughter. I'd checked the entire house multiple times, armed with a flashlight and Sarah's old baseball bat, but I never found anything out of place, no signs of an intruder. I was starting to think I was losing my mind. Until now, there was no mistaking that sound. Someone or something was up there. I stood at the base of the attic stairs, my hand gripping the bat so tightly my knuckles were white. The footsteps had stopped, but I could hear something else now. A soft scratching sound, like nails dragging across wood. "Hello?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. "Is someone there?" Silence. Then, so faint I almost missed it, a whisper. "Help us." A chill ran down my spine. Us. How many people were up there? Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I took a step up the stairs. The old wood creaked under my weight, and I winced at the noise. Another step. Another. The scratching sound grew louder. As I reached the top of the stairs, I fumbled for the light switch. It clicked uselessly. The power was still out. I raised my flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom of the attic. The attic was cluttered with the usual detritus of a long-lived-in home. Old furniture draped in sheets, boxes of Christmas decorations, trunks filled with who knows what. But my eyes were drawn to the far corner, where the scratching sound was coming from. There, huddled behind a stack of boxes, I saw movement. My breath caught in my throat as the beam of my flashlight fell on them. 3 figures, small and thin, their skin pale as milk. Children? No, not children. Their limbs were too long, too jointed, and their faces. I stifled a scream. Where eyes should have been, there were only dark, empty sockets. Their mouths were too wide, filled with needle-like teeth. They shrank back from the light, hissing softly, but one of them, the largest, stepped forward. When it spoke, its voice was a raspy whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You came," it said. "We've been waiting so long." I stumbled backward, nearly falling down the stairs. What are you?" I managed to choke out. The creature tilted its head, an eerily human gesture. "We are the forgotten ones, the left behind, and you are our way out." As it spoke, the other 2 began to uncurl themselves, rising to their full height. They were taller than I'd first thought, their limbs unfolding like some grotesque origami. "Stay back," I warned, raising the bat. But my arms were shaking so badly I doubt I could have swung it if I'd tried. The leader took another step forward. "We mean you no harm," it said, its lipless mouth forming the words with difficulty. "We only want to be free, to live again." "Is that so much to ask?" I shook my head, unable to comprehend what I was hearing. "I don't understand. How long have you been up here?" A sound came from the creature that might have been a laugh. "Time means nothing to us anymore. We have been here since the house was built, waiting, watching, hoping someone would find us." As it spoke, memories began to surface. Stories Sarah had told me about the house, how the original owners had disappeared mysteriously, how subsequent families had fled in the night, leaving all their possessions behind, how no one ever stayed in the house for long. "What do you want from me?" I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. The creature's mouth stretched into a terrible smile. "Only a small thing. A trade of sorts. Your life for ours. 3 of us. 1 of you. It's more than fair, don't you think? I felt a scream building in my throat. But before I could let it out, the power suddenly came back on. The attic was flooded with harsh electric light, and the creatures shrieked in pain, covering their eyeless faces. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I turned and ran, taking the stairs 2 at a time. I could hear them behind me, their inhuman shrieks turning to angry howls as they gave chase. I burst out of the front door into the raging storm, not caring about the rain or the wind. I just ran, my feet slipping on the wet grass, my lungs burning as I gasped for air. I didn't stop running until I reached the main road, where by some miracle, a car was passing by. I flagged it down, probably looking like a madwoman, soaked to the bone, wild-eyed, babbling about creatures in the attic. The elderly couple in the car were kind enough to drive me to the police station. I told the officers everything, fully expecting them to lock me up in the psych ward. But to my surprise, the sergeant listened with a grim expression. "You're not the first," he said when I'd finished my story. "That house, there's something not right about it. We've had reports over the years, but never anything we could prove. They sent a team to investigate, but of course they found nothing. The attic was empty, no sign of the creatures or any disturbance. Sarah came home early from her trip, shaken by what had happened. She put the house up for sale the next day. It's been months now, and I still wake up in a cold sweat some nights, the echo of those raspy voices in my ears. I can't help but wonder about the family that bought the house. Have they heard the footsteps yet? The scratching in the walls? And sometimes, when I drive past that old Victorian on a stormy night, I swear I can see pale faces watching from the attic window, waiting, always waiting. So if you ever find yourself house-sitting in an old home and you hear strange noises from the attic, don't investigate. Don't try to help. Just run. Run as fast and as far as you can. Because some things are better left undisturbed, and some offers, no matter how fair they might seem, come at far too high a price. The shadows danced on the walls, twisting and writhing in ways that defied the laws of physics. I blinked hard, sure I was imagining things, but when I opened my eyes, they were still there, moving with a life of their own. It was the 3rd night of the blackout, and I was starting to think I was losing my mind. The storm had hit us hard, knocking out power to the entire neighborhood. At first, it had been almost fun, a break from the monotony of everyday life, an excuse to light candles and pretend we were living in a simpler time. But as the days wore on and the electricity showed no signs of returning, the novelty wore thin. I'd been sitting in my living room, a single candle flickering on the coffee table, trying to distract myself with a book. But the words swam on the page, and I found my eyes drawn to the shadows on the wall. They seemed to pulse with the candlelight, stretching and contracting in impossible ways. I watched, mesmerized, as one shadow in particular began to take shape. It looked almost human. I shook my head, trying to clear it. Lack of sleep and too much canned food were clearly taking their toll. I was about to blow out the candle and try to get some rest when a flash of lightning illuminated the room. In that brief, electric moment, I saw it clearly. The shadow on the wall wasn't just human-shaped. It was looking at me. I scrambled backward, knocking over the candle in my haste. The room plunged into darkness, broken only by the intermittent flashes of lightning from outside. Heart pounding, I fumbled for my phone, cursing as I remembered the battery had died hours ago. I needed light. I needed to see. I stumbled to the kitchen, banging my shin on the coffee table as I went. My hands shook as I searched the drawers for matches or a flashlight, anything to push back the darkness. Finally, my fingers closed around a book of matches. I struck one, the small flame casting a weak glow around me. And there, reflected in the window, I saw them. Shadows, Dozens of them. Not formless patches of darkness, Moirot, but distinct shapes. Human shapes. They moved across the glass, their non-existent eyes fixed on me. I dropped the match, plunging the kitchen into darkness once more. This couldn't be real. I was dreaming, hallucinating, anything but actually seeing these impossible things. Another flash of lightning, and I saw them again. Closer now. No longer confined to the walls or windows, they seemed to be moving through the air itself, drifting towards me with terrible purpose. I ran. Out of the kitchen, through the living room, up the stairs. I slammed my bedroom door shut, leaning against it as if my weight could keep the shadows at bay. For a long moment, there was only the sound of my ragged breathing and the storm raging outside. Then softly at first, but growing louder, I heard it. A scratching sound, like nails dragging across wood, coming from the other side of the door. This isn't real, I whispered to myself. This can't be real. But the scratching continued, growing more insistent with each passing second, and beneath it, I could hear something else. Whispers. Countless voices speaking in languages I didn't understand, but that filled me with a deep, primal dread. I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to block out the sound. But the voices seemed to be inside my head now, growing louder, more insistent. A particularly loud crack of thunder shook the house, and with it came a blinding flash of lightning. In that moment of illumination, I saw them seeping under the door, living shadows, flowing across the floor like spilled ink. I scrambled onto my bed, watching in horror as the shadows began to take shape. They rose from the floor, forming into vaguely human silhouettes. But there was nothing human about the way they moved, gliding across the room with a fluidity that made my stomach churn. One of them reached out, its arm elongating impossibly, stretching towards me. I could feel the cold emanating from it, a deep, penetrating chill that seemed to reach into my very soul. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. The shadow paused, its featureless head tilting to one side. When it spoke, its voice was like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "To live," it said. "To be whole again." "I don't understand," I said, pressing myself against the headboard, trying to put as much distance between myself and the shadow as possible. "We are the forgotten," another shadow said, its voice like gravel grinding together. "The lost, the abandoned, and you. You can bring us back." I shook my head, unable to comprehend what I was hearing. "How? I can't." "It's simple," the first shadow said, moving closer. "We need a vessel, a body. Yours will do nicely." Terror surged through me, breaking through the paralysis of fear. I lunged for the window, my only possible escape route. But as my hand touched the latch, I felt something cold wrap around my ankle. I looked down to see a tendril of shadow coiled around my leg. It pulled, and I fell, hitting the floor hard. The shadows converged on me, their cold forms pressing in from all sides. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The shadows were all around me now, seeping into my skin, filling my lungs. I could feel them inside me, a deep, penetrating cold that was quickly numbing my body and mind. As my vision began to fade, I saw one last flash of lightning. In that final moment of clarity, I understood. These weren't just shadows. They were something older, something that had existed in the dark places of the world long before humans ever walked the earth. And now, they were taking back what they saw as rightfully theirs. The last thing I heard before consciousness slipped away was a chorus of whispers, 1,000 voices speaking as one. "Thank you for letting us in." When I awoke, the power was back on. Sunlight streamed through my bedroom window, and the storm had passed. For a moment, I thought it had all been a terrible nightmare. But as I stood up, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were different, darker, and when I smiled, it wasn't my smile at all. They were right. It was simple. They just needed a way in, and in my fear and confusion, I had given it to them. Now, as I write this, I can feel them inside me, waiting, watching. They're patient. They've waited thousands of years for this chance. They can wait a little longer to fully take control. So if you ever find yourself in a long blackout, surrounded by candlelight and strange shadows, be careful. Don't look too closely at the darkness. Don't listen to the whispers, and whatever you do, don't let them in. Because once they're inside, they never truly leave, and the person who emerges on the other side, well, they might look like you. They might sound like you, but believe me when I say, it won't be you at all. The rusted padlock crumbled in my hand, decades of neglect finally giving way. The heavy door creaked open, revealing the yawning darkness beyond. As the beam of my flashlight cut through the gloom, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to stumble into something we shouldn't. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah whispered, her breath visible in the chilly night air. I nodded, trying to project more confidence than I felt. "Come on, it'll be an adventure. How often do you get to explore an abandoned asylum?" Our little group of four, me, Sarah, Mike, and Jess, had been planning this excursion for weeks. Hillcrest Asylum had been shut down in the 70s after a series of scandals and mysterious patient deaths. It had stood empty ever since, a decaying monument to a darker time in mental health treatment. We'd heard all the stories, of course, ghost sightings, strange noises, people going in and never coming out. But we were skeptical, armed with our flashlights and our certainty that there were no such things as ghosts. As we stepped inside, the musty smell of decay hit us like a wall. Debris crunched under our feet, broken tiles, shattered glass, the detritus of half a century of abandonment. "This place is creepy as hell," Mike muttered, his flashlight beam dancing nervously across the walls. We moved deeper into the building, our excitement slowly giving way to an uneasy silence. There was something oppressive about the air, as if the very walls were saturated with the pain and despair of those who had been imprisoned here. We passed through what must have been the admissions area, then into a long corridor lined with patient rooms. Most of the doors hung open, revealing sparse, decaying interiors. But one door, about halfway down the hall, was closed. "Hey, check this out," Jess said, pointing her light at the door. Unlike the others, this one looked clean, well-maintained, as if it had been used recently. A chill ran down my spine as I approached it. The nameplate on the door read Room 237. I reached for the handle, then hesitated. Something felt wrong. "Maybe we shouldn't," Sarah began, but I had already turned the knob. The door swung open silently, revealing a room that looked nothing like the others we'd seen. It was immaculate, as if frozen in time. A neatly made bed, a desk with papers stacked on it, even curtains hanging at the barred window. "What the hell?" Mike whispered. "How is this possible?" We stepped inside, our curiosity overriding our apprehension. The room felt different. The air was cooler, and there was a faint smell of antiseptic that hadn't been present in the rest of the building. I moved to the desk, picking up one of the papers. It was a patient intake form, dated today. "Guys," I said, my voice shaking, "look at this." They gathered around, their faces pale in the flashlight beams as they saw the date. "That's impossible," Sarah said. "This place has been closed for decades." A sound from the hallway made us all jump. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming closer. "Hide!" I hissed, already diving for the closet. The others followed, cramming in beside me. We barely got the door closed before we heard someone enter the room. Through the slats in the closet door, I could see a figure moving around the room. It was dressed in what looked like an old-fashioned nurse's uniform, complete with a starched white cap. But something about its movements was off, too fluid, almost as if it were gliding rather than walking. The nurse, if that's what it was, paused at the desk, picking up the intake form I had just been looking at. It made a soft clicking sound, like chitinous mandibles rubbing together. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure it would hear it. Beside me, I could feel Sarah trembling. Suddenly, the nurse's head snapped towards the closet. I caught a glimpse of its face and had to bite back a scream. Where eyes should have been, there were only empty, dark sockets. Its mouth was too wide, filled with needle-like teeth. It took a step towards the closet, then another. I closed my eyes, certain we were about to die. The sound of shattering glass made me jump. My eyes flew open to see Mike standing there, a broken bottle in his hand. He must have found it in the closet and decided to act. "Run!" he yelled, swinging the bottle at the creature. We didn't need to be told twice. We burst out of the closet and ran for the door. I chanced to glance back and immediately wished I hadn't. The nurse thing had Mike by the throat, lifting him off the ground with inhuman strength. Its jaw unhinged, opening impossibly wide. I wanted to go back, to help him. But Sarah grabbed my arm and pulled me along. "We can't help him," she sobbed. "We have to get out." We ran down the corridor, the sounds of Mike's screams echoing behind us. But they weren't alone. Other doors were opening, more of those things emerging. Some wore nurse uniforms, others patient gowns. All had those terrible, empty eyes and too wide mouths. We reached the main entrance, but the door we'd come through was gone. In its place was a solid wall. "No, no, no," Jess moaned, pounding on the wall. "This can't be happening." The creatures were getting closer, their movements becoming more frenzied as they sensed their prey was cornered. "There!" Sarah pointed to a window. Without hesitation, we ran for it. I grabbed a chair and smashed it against the glass. It shattered, and we climbed through, ignoring the cuts from the broken shards. We fell to the ground outside, the cool night air a shock after the stifling atmosphere of the asylum. To my amazement, we were no longer in the overgrown grounds we'd crossed earlier. We were in a well-maintained lawn, with modern cars parked nearby. A security guard came running up, his flashlight beam blinding us. "Hey, what are you doing? This is a restricted area." We babbled our story, telling him about the creatures, about Mike. He looked at us like we were insane. "Lady, I don't know what you're on, but this is a working hospital. Has been for years. Now come with me. We need to get you checked out." As he led us away, I looked back at the building. It was no longer the decaying ruin we'd entered. It was a modern, well-lit facility. But there, in a second-floor window, I saw a figure watching us. A nurse, with empty eyes and a mouth full of sharp teeth. It waved, a slow, mocking gesture. Then it was gone. We spent the night in the police station trying to explain what had happened. They didn't believe us, of course. How could they? We were drug tested, questioned, eventually released with a warning about trespassing. Mike was never found. The official story is that he ran off, spooked by nearly getting caught. But we know the truth. Sometimes, late at night, I think I can hear his screams. And when I close my eyes, I see those empty sockets staring at me, that too wide mouth opening to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. We tried to go back once, in the daylight, but we couldn't find the asylum. The road we'd taken that night simply wasn't there. I don't know what happened that night. Were we somehow transported to another time, another reality? Or did we stumble into something older, something that has always been there, hiding just beneath the surface of our world? All I know is that I'll never look at an abandoned building the same way again. Because sometimes, the things we think are empty are anything but. And sometimes, the past isn't as dead as we'd like to believe. So if you're ever tempted to explore an abandoned place on a dark, rainy night, Don't. Some doors are better left unopened, some mysteries better left unsolved. Because once you've seen what lurks in the shadows, you can never unsee it. And they'll be waiting for you, with their empty eyes and hungry smiles, ready to welcome you into their world. Forever. The steam-filled bathroom mirror reflected a shadowy figure that wasn't my own. For a split second, as I wiped away the condensation, I saw it. Tall, unnaturally thin, with eyes that glowed in the dim light. I blinked, and it was gone, leaving only my own startled face staring back at me. I've always been a skeptic when it comes to the supernatural. Ghost stories, urban legends, things that go bump in the night. I dismissed them all as products of overactive imaginations or too much late-night television. But what happened in my bathroom that stormy night shook my disbelief to its core. It had been raining for days, the kind of relentless downpour that makes you wonder if it'll ever stop. I'd been cooped up in my apartment and working from home, the constant drumming of rain on the windows my only companion. By the 5th day, I was starting to feel a bit stir-crazy. I decided a hot shower might help clear my head. As I stood under the steaming water, I could hear the storm raging outside, wind howling around the corners of the building. The bathroom was filled with steam, the mirror completely fogged over. It was as I was stepping out of the shower, reaching for my towel, that I felt it. A sudden chill, as if a cold breeze had swept through the room. I shivered, quickly wrapping the towel around myself. That's when I noticed the mirror. The steam had cleared in one spot, a perfect handprint much larger than my own. I stared at it, a sense of unease growing in the pit of my stomach. I hadn't touched the mirror yet, trying to shake off the eerie feeling. I reached out to wipe away the rest of the condensation. That's when I saw it, the figure in the mirror. It was only there for an instant, but the image burned itself into my mind, tall and gaunt, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. And those eyes, they glowed with an otherworldly light, fixed directly on me. I stumbled backward, nearly slipping on the wet tile. When I looked back at the mirror, it showed only my own reflection, pale and wide-eyed with shock. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself, trying to calm my racing heart. "It's just your imagination playing tricks on you." But as I turned to leave the bathroom, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, on the steamy glass of the shower door, was a message, written in long, spidery letters. "I see you." I ran from the bathroom, slamming the door behind me. My mind was reeling, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. It couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of prank or a hallucination brought on by too many days of isolation. I spent the rest of the evening huddled on my couch, every creak and groan of the old building making me jump. I tried to distract myself with TV, with books, with anything that might take my mind off what had happened in the bathroom, but my eyes kept straying to that closed door, half expecting to see a shadowy figure emerge. As night fell, the storm intensified. Lightning flashed, illuminating my apartment in stark, electric bursts. In those brief moments of brightness, I could have sworn I saw something moving in the shadows, a tall, thin shape that disappeared as soon as I tried to focus on it. Sleep was out of the question. I sat there, wide awake, as the hours ticked by. The rational part of my mind tried to argue that I was overreacting, that there had to be a logical explanation. But another part, a more primal part, knew that something was very, very wrong. It was just past midnight when the power went out. One moment, the TV was on, providing a comforting background noise. The next, I was plunged into darkness, the sudden silence broken only by the sound of rain and my own ragged breathing. I fumbled for my phone, using its flashlight to illuminate the room. The beam seemed pitifully weak against the pressing darkness. As I swung it around, I caught a glimpse of something that made my heart stop. There, in the corner of the room, was a figure. The same impossibly tall, thin shape I'd seen in the mirror. It stood perfectly still, its glowing eyes fixed on me. I scrambled off the couch, backing away until I hit the wall. The figure didn't move, but I could feel its gaze following me. "What are you?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want?" Slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, the figure raised one long, spindly arm. It pointed at me, its finger elongating impossibly until it nearly touched my chest. "You," it said, its voice a dry whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We want you." Before I could react, the thing moved. One moment it was across the room, the next it was right in front of me, its face inches from mine. I could smell its breath, cold and damp like a long, sealed tomb. I screamed, ducking under its arm and running for the door. But as I reached for the handle, I felt something cold wrap around my ankle. I looked down to see a tendril of shadow, solid as rope, coiled around my leg. The thing pulled, and I fell, hitting the floor hard. As I struggled to get up, more shadowy tendrils emerged from the darkness, wrapping around my arms and legs. "No," I gasped, fighting against the icy bonds. "Please, no!" The figure loomed over me, its body seeming to blend with the shadows around it. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. "We have waited so long," it hissed. "So long for someone to see us, to let us in. And now, finally, you have." I felt the shadows tightening around me, pulling me towards the creature's gaping maw. I closed my eyes, certain that this was the end, and then, suddenly, light flooded the room. The power had come back on. The creature shrieked, a sound of fury and pain that made my ears ring. I felt the shadowy bonds loosen, then disappear entirely. When I opened my eyes, the thing was gone. I scrambled to my feet, not wasting a second. I ran out of the apartment, down the stairs, and into the rain-soaked night. I didn't stop running until I reached a 24-hour diner several blocks away. I spent the rest of the night there, huddled in a booth, jumping at every shadow. When dawn finally broke, I went to a hotel, unable to face the thought of returning to my apartment. It's been weeks now, and I still haven't gone back. I've sent friends to collect some of my things, but I can't bring myself to step foot in that place again. I don't know if what I saw was real, if it was some kind of hallucination, or something else entirely. But I do know one thing. I'll never look at mirrors or shadows the same way again. Sometimes, late at night, I think I see movement out of the corner of my eye, a tall, thin shape that disappears when I turn to look at it. And sometimes, when I'm in the bathroom, I could swear I see a faint message appearing in the steam on the mirror. We're still waiting. So if you ever find yourself alone on a stormy night, and you catch a glimpse of something strange in your mirror, don't look too closely. Don't wipe away the steam, because sometimes the things we think we see are all too real, and once you've let them in, they never truly leave. The neon sign flickered ominously as I pulled into the deserted gas station. Last stop for 100 miles. It proclaimed in sputtering red letters. I hadn't seen another car for hours, and the storm was getting worse by the minute. I needed fuel, but something about this place made my skin crawl. I'd been driving all day, trying to outrun both the storm and my own thoughts, the fight with my girlfriend, the stress of my job, the feeling that my life was spiraling out of control. I thought a long road trip might clear my head. Instead, it had led me here, to this desolate gas station in the middle of nowhere, with angry clouds above and an endless stretch of desert on all sides. As I pulled up to the pump, the rain started coming down in sheets. I cursed under my breath, realizing I'd have to get out in this downpour to fill up. I sat there for a moment, watching the rain hammer against my windshield, trying to work up the courage to face the elements. That's when I saw them. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, shadows playing in the rain. but as I squinted through the deluge, I could make out shapes moving at the edge of the flickering light cast by the station's fluorescence. People? No, not people. The shapes were too tall, too thin, their movements too fluid to be human. They emerged from the darkness like ghosts, dark silhouettes against the gray backdrop of the storm. There were 3 of them, spread out in a semicircle around my car, moving with a slow, deliberate pace that made my heart race. I sat frozen, my hand on the key, debating whether to start the car and try to outrun them, but my gas gauge hovered dangerously close to empty. I wouldn't make it far. As they drew closer, I could make out more details, each one making my blood run colder. They were impossibly tall, at least 8 feet, with limbs that seemed too long and thin for their bodies. Their faces, I couldn't see their faces, just smooth, featureless expanses where features should have been. They reached my car, surrounding it. One stood at the front, one at the back, and one right outside my driver's side window. I held my breath, afraid that even the slightest movement might provoke them. A sound cut through the pounding of the rain, a tapping on my window, slow, deliberate, like the way they had walked. Tap, tap, tap. I turned, ever so slowly, to look out my window. The creature stood there, its blank face inches from the glass. As I watched, horrified, a seam appeared where its mouth should be. It split open, revealing rows of sharp, needle-like teeth. "Let us in," it said, its voice a hiss that somehow carried through the closed window and the roar of the storm. "We only want to help." I shook my head, unable to speak, unable to look away from that terrible mouth. The creature tilted its head, an eerily human gesture that only served to emphasize how inhuman it truly was. "Your car needs fuel," it continued. "The storm is getting worse. Let us help you." "No," I managed to croak out. "No, thank you. I'm fine." The creature's mouth stretched wider, a grotesque parody of a smile. "Are you sure? It's not safe out here. Anything could happen to you." The threat in its words was unmistakable. I glanced at the other 2 creatures. They had moved closer, pressing against the car. I could hear the metal groaning under their touch. "Please," I said, hating the tremor in my voice. "Please just leave me alone." The creature at my window leaned closer, its blank face filling my vision. "We can't do that," it said. "You see, we're hungry, so very hungry, and you look delicious." Terror surged through me, breaking through the paralysis of fear. I turned the key, silently praying that the engine would start despite the low fuel. To my immense relief, it roared to life. I didn't stop to question this miracle. I slammed the car into drive and floored the accelerator. The creatures shrieked, a sound that set my teeth on edge and made my vision blur. The car shot forward, and I felt a moment of resistance, then a sickening thud as I hit one of them. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I drove blindly through the rain, my headlights barely penetrating the gloom. I could hear things hitting the roof and sides of the car. Were they jumping on it? Throwing things? I didn't dare look. I just drove, faster than I'd ever driven in my life, praying to whatever might be listening that I'd find another gas station before I ran out of fuel. The gas gauge dipped lower and lower as the miles flew by. Just as the needle touched empty, I saw it. Another gas station, its lights a beacon of hope in the storm-ravaged night. I pulled in, my hands shaking as I turned off the engine. For a long moment, I just sat there, trying to catch my breath, trying to convince myself that what had happened was real. Slowly, I got out of the car, my legs wobbly as I made my way to the pump. As I started to fill up, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, on the roof and hood of my car, were deep gouges in the metal, claw marks, as if something with impossibly sharp talons had been trying to tear its way in. I finished fueling as quickly as I could and went inside to pay, half expecting to see those creatures waiting for me. but the store was empty save for a bored-looking clerk who barely glanced up from his phone as I paid. As I walked back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I looked around, scanning the darkness beyond the station's lights. For a moment, I thought I saw something. Tall, thin shapes moving in the shadows. But then I blinked, and they were gone. I got in my car and drove away, not slowing down until I was miles from that place. I didn't stop driving until I reached a well-lit, populated area where I checked into a motel and collapsed into bed, exhausted and shaken. In the light of day, it all seemed like a bad dream. But the claw marks on my car were still there, a tangible reminder that what I'd experienced was all too real. I never told anyone about what happened that night. Who would believe me? But I've never forgotten it. Now, whenever I'm driving late at night and I see a lonely gas station looming out of the darkness, I keep going. No matter how low my fuel gauge gets, no matter how bad the weather is, I'd rather risk running out of gas than face what might be waiting in those distant pools of light. Because sometimes, the most dangerous things aren't the storms or the empty roads. Sometimes, they're the things that offer help when you're at your most vulnerable. The things that look almost but not quite human. The things that are always hungry, always waiting for someone to make that one fatal mistake. So if you're ever driving late at night and you come across a gas station that seems too quiet, too empty, keep driving. Don't stop, no matter how much you need to, because you never know what might be waiting for you there, hidden just beyond the reach of the lights, ready to offer you a helping hand that you'll never be able to let go of. There's something eerie about driving alone at night. The stretch of highway ahead of me seemed endless, the dark horizon blending seamlessly with the road, as if it was pulling me into the unknown. The hum of the truck's engine was comforting in a way, its steady rhythm a reminder that, at least for now, I was in control of something in this wide, empty world. But as I've learned in all my years as a long-haul trucker, the open road can play tricks on your mind. Sometimes, you see things that make you question just how alone you really are. It was one of those nights, the kind where the sky was pitch black, the stars barely visible, and the air had that thick, oppressive silence that clings to everything. I was about 300 miles from my next stop, driving through a desolate stretch of highway that cut through the middle of nowhere. No lights, no houses, just an endless road and the occasional flicker of a passing car, though even those had become fewer and farther between. I've always been the type to keep going, no matter how late it got. If I pulled over every time the road got creepy, I'd never make a delivery on time. But that night, something felt off. It wasn't something I could put my finger on right away, just a gnawing sense in the back of my mind that kept growing the longer I drove. I tried to shake it off, attributing it to exhaustion or maybe too much caffeine. But it was hard to ignore the way the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, like I was being watched. That's when I saw it. A car, broken down on the shoulder, its hazard lights blinking weakly in the distance. As I got closer, I could make out the silhouette of an old sedan, sitting there like a forgotten relic. My instinct was to keep driving. This was the kind of stretch where cell service was spotty at best, and I wasn't sure how safe it would be to stop in the middle of nowhere. But something in me, the trucker's code, I guess, made me slow down. I've been on the other side of a breakdown before, and it's not fun. I pulled over a few yards ahead of the car, putting my hazards on and stepping out into the night. The air was cooler than I expected, with that crisp bite that comes with early fall. The sedan's interior was dark, and as I approached, I noticed something strange. The engine was still running, but the driver's seat was empty. No one was behind the wheel. I knocked on the window anyway, just in case someone was lying down in the back, but there was no response. The silence around me felt too loud, like the night was holding its breath. I backed away from the car, glancing around. but all I could see was the long, empty road behind me and the vast, open fields that stretched into the darkness on either side. Whoever had been in that car was long gone, or so it seemed. But where would they have gone? There was nothing out here for miles. No gas station, no houses. Just empty land and highway. I glanced back at my truck, debating whether to call it in, but that nagging feeling that I wasn't alone kept gnawing at me. I decided to head back to the safety of my rig, figuring I could report the car when I hit the next town. But as I reached for the door, I noticed something that stopped me cold. The side mirror on the passenger side of my truck had been bent inward, like someone or something had brushed past it. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't seen anyone on the road for hours, and I sure as hell didn't hear anyone walking up behind me. The unsettling part was how deliberate it looked, like someone had made a point of pushing it out of place, just enough to make me notice. I did a quick scan around the truck, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow, but there was nothing. Just that same oppressive darkness pressing in from all sides. I was alone, or at least, I hoped I was. I climbed back into the cab and locked the doors. My hands were shaking as I turned the key, the engine rumbling to life beneath me. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, maybe the wind or even my own hand brushing the mirror earlier without realizing it. But deep down, I knew better. As I pulled back onto the highway, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing on the side of the road, watching me drive away. But there was nothing, just the blinking hazards of the abandoned car fading into the distance. I cranked the radio, hoping to drown out the gnawing tension in my chest. The familiar voices of late-night DJs filled the cab, talking about everything from sports to politics, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept drifting back to that car and the empty driver's seat, the way the mirror had been bent out of place like someone had deliberately left their mark. About 20 miles down the road, the feeling of unease still hadn't left me. I couldn't shake the thought that I wasn't alone on that stretch of highway, that something, or someone, had been watching me, maybe even following me. I glanced in the rearview mirror again, and that's when I saw it. Headlights. They were distant, barely visible, but they were there. A pair of dim yellow lights flickering in and out of view, like they were struggling to keep up with me. My pulse quickened. It could have been another car, sure, but something about the way those lights wavered, almost like they were disappearing and reappearing, sent a chill down my spine. I pressed the accelerator, pushing my truck a little harder. The road stretched on ahead of me, empty as far as the eye could see, but those lights, they kept flickering in the distance, never quite disappearing. My grip tightened on the wheel. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe the stress of driving for hours in the dead of night was getting to me. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I decided to make a stop at the next rest area. It was about another 40 miles down the road, but I needed a break. Maybe if I pulled over, got out of the truck, and stretched my legs, the unease would go away. When I finally reached the rest area, it was as empty as the highway had been. A couple of vending machines hummed quietly under the fluorescent lights, and there was one other car parked near the entrance to the restroom. I pulled in, turning off the engine and sitting in silence for a moment, trying to shake the tension that had gripped me since seeing that abandoned sedan. I got out of the truck, keeping an eye on the road behind me. No headlights, no sign of the flickering lights that had followed me earlier. For the first time in what felt like hours, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. But as I walked towards the restroom, I felt it again, that sense of being watched. My skin prickled, and I stopped in my tracks, glancing around the empty rest area. Nothing. Just the quiet hum of the vending machines and the distant chirping of insects. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was all in my head. But then I saw it. The side mirror of my truck, bent inward again. My stomach dropped. I had just parked. No one had been around. And yet, somehow, the mirror had been pushed out of place, just like before. I didn't wait to find out what would happen next. I sprinted back to the truck, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't even bother adjusting the mirror this time. I slammed the door, locked it, and fired up the engine, pulling out of the rest area as fast as I could. I didn't stop again until I reached the next town, and even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was still out there on that dark stretch of highway, watching, waiting, and I wasn't going to give them another chance to make their move. There's a stillness that hangs in the air when you're far from civilization. It wraps around you, almost suffocating, and every little sound, whether it's a creak, a rustle, or even your own footsteps, feels magnified. I've never been one to scare easily, but when you're out in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest town, even the most level-headed person can start to feel a bit on edge. My girlfriend, Emma, and I had been planning this road trip for months. We wanted to get away from the city, disconnect for a bit, and spend a few nights under the stars. We'd mapped out a route that took us through some back roads and rural areas, places where you could drive for hours without seeing another car. It sounded perfect in theory, a little adventure, just the two of us, away from the hustle and bustle. But by the time we ended up near that old farm, I was starting to regret the decision. We hadn't planned on stopping there, but the sun was setting, and the next campground was still a good 2 hours away. Emma spotted the clearing first, just off the main road, and suggested we set up camp for the night. From the looks of it, the place had been abandoned for years. The farmhouse was dilapidated, its windows boarded up, and the barn nearby was little more than a crumbling shell. The land around it was overgrown, the grass waist-high in some places, but there was a flat patch not far from the house that seemed perfect for our tent. "We can camp here," Emma said, already pulling out our gear. I wasn't as enthusiastic. Something about the place felt wrong. It wasn't just the isolation or the fact that the farm looked like it hadn't seen a living soul in years. There was an unsettling quiet, the kind that pressed down on you and made you want to lower your voice, even though no one else was around. "You sure about this?" I asked, glancing around the property. Emma shrugged. "It's just for one night. Besides, look at that sky." She pointed up, and sure enough, the stars were just starting to come out, dotting the twilight with little points of light. Reluctantly, I agreed. We set up our tent, unpacked our stuff, and before long, we were sitting by a small fire, eating dinner and talking about the next leg of our trip. For a while, it felt peaceful. The kind of peace you can only get when you're miles from anywhere, with nothing but nature surrounding you. But as the night wore on, that peace started to fray at the edges. It started with little things, a soft rustling in the tall grass behind us, the way the wind seemed to shift direction, making the trees around us creak and groan like they were alive. At first, I brushed it off as nerves. I wasn't used to being so far from civilization, and my imagination was probably just getting the best of me. Emma seemed completely unfazed, poking at the fire and humming quietly to herself. But then I heard it, a distinct crunch, like footsteps in the gravel, coming from the direction of the farmhouse. I sat up straight, straining my ears to listen. The fire crackled, but beyond that, there was only silence. I told myself it was probably just an animal, a deer or maybe a raccoon scrounging around for food. But the sound had been too deliberate, too heavy for a small animal. "You hear that?" I asked Emma, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up from the fire, her brow furrowing. "Hear what?" "Footsteps, over by the house." Emma rolled her eyes, but I could tell by the way she glanced over her shoulder that she was a little spooked too. "It's probably just the wind," she said, though her tone didn't sound so sure. I nodded, but the uneasy feeling in my gut didn't go away. We sat in silence for a while, listening, but the footsteps didn't come back. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Eventually, we climbed into the tent, and Emma fell asleep almost immediately, her soft breathing filling the small space. I, on the other hand, couldn't relax. Every little sound outside seemed amplified. The wind rustling through the trees, the distant creak of the farmhouse, even the occasional crack of a branch breaking. I kept telling myself it was just the sounds of the countryside, that this was normal. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, watching us. It must have been sometime after midnight when I heard it again. The footsteps. This time, they were closer, moving through the grass, slow and deliberate. My heart raced as I lay there, frozen, straining to hear. They stopped, just outside the tent. For a moment, I was certain someone, or something, was standing right outside, listening to us. I held my breath, waiting for the zipper to slide open or the sound of someone, or something, breathing just outside the thin canvas. But there was nothing. Only silence. Then, the footsteps started again, moving away this time, back toward the farmhouse. I lay there for what felt like hours, wide awake, my mind racing. I debated waking Emma, but what would I say? That I heard footsteps? That I was scared of an old, abandoned farm? I didn't want to freak her out over something that was probably just my imagination. But then, just as I was starting to convince myself I'd imagined it, there was a soft scratching sound against the side of the tent. My blood ran cold. It was faint, barely noticeable, but unmistakable. Something or someone was out there. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest. "Emma," I whispered, shaking her awake. She groaned, half asleep. "What?" "There's something outside." She blinked at me, groggy and confused. "What are you talking about?" "Just listen." For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then, the scratching came again, this time louder, more deliberate. Emma sat up straight, her eyes wide. "What the hell is that?" "I don't know." We both sat there, holding our breath, listening. The scratching stopped, but the uneasy silence remained. I reached for the flashlight, flicking it on and pointing it toward the side of the tent where the sound had come from. The light illuminated the canvas, casting long shadows, but there was nothing, no shape, no movement. "We should leave," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Emma didn't argue. She grabbed her shoes, and we quietly unzipped the tent, stepping out into the cold night air. The fire had died down to embers, casting a faint, reddish glow over the clearing. I swept the flashlight around the area, but there was no sign of anyone, or anything. "We're probably just freaking ourselves out," Emma whispered, though I could hear the fear in her voice. "Maybe," I muttered, though I didn't believe it. We stood there for a moment, staring at the farmhouse in the distance, its silhouette barely visible against the starry sky. There was no movement, no sign of life, but that oppressive feeling of being watched still lingered, heavy and suffocating. "We should pack up and go," Emma said, breaking the silence. I nodded, and we quickly began breaking down the tent, stuffing our gear back into the truck. As we worked, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone, or something, emerge from the darkness. Once we were packed up, we climbed into the truck, locking the doors behind us. I started the engine, and we pulled out of the clearing, the old farmhouse disappearing into the distance behind us. We didn't talk much on the drive. The unease hung between us like a fog, thick and heavy. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see headlights or some shadowy figure following us, but the road remained empty. By the time we reached the next town, the sun was just starting to rise, casting a pale light over the landscape. We found a diner and sat down for breakfast, though neither of us had much of an appetite. "Do you think it was just animals?" Emma asked after a long stretch of silence. I shrugged. Maybe. But deep down, I didn't believe that. There was something about that place, something off. And whatever it was, I was just glad we left when we did.